Thanks again, everyone, for joining. I'm going to pass this to Dan Moon. He's the President and Executive Director for the Environmental Business Council. So Dan, take it away.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this semi-beautiful day in Boston. Again, my name is Dan Moon. I'm the President and Executive Director of the Environmental Business Council. Special thanks to our speakers who Bill has brought in from various parts of the country for the most part. And so thank you all for joining us, and especially if you're on a different time zone and had the pleasure of getting up earlier. But I must admit, this is sort of late in our day, 9 o'clock. Normally our programs, if we were in person, start at 7:30, 7:45. And so thank you again for your support of the EBC, and I hope you and your families are continuing to stay safe in these challenging times. Bill, climate change is sort of the critical issue of our times. President Biden certainly, fortunately, is taking this issue a little bit more seriously, as he is taking more seriously the whole issue of infrastructure and infrastructure funding, which becomes the focus of our program today. I think today is actually the third program on the layered defense system. Bill can explain why he thinks it's the second one, but we can talk about that. So today I will go through a few slides about the EBC and then turn the program over to Bill. I want to thank our partners for today's program, the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority Advisory Board, and also Suffolk University, the Center for Real Estate. And with that, I'd like to introduce Richard Taylor, the director of the center. Bill, why don't you make a few comments about and welcome everybody.
Richard is a dear friend, and for those of you in Boston, you probably know Richard very well. Richard is a graduate of Boston University, Harvard College, and is a Harvard Law School, excuse me, and is a Rhodes Scholar. He's been Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He is now the director of the Suffolk University Real Estate Center and a very successful developer in the city of Boston. Perhaps, however, his most important credential is that he's been married for over 40 years to Kathy Taylor, who's on this webinar, who in her own is a leader in Boston, as the former chair of the Roxbury Community College. And of course, also has the distinguished qualification of being my son's godmother. So Richard, with that introduction, please welcome us to this webinar.
Thank you, Bill. Perhaps my bride, Kathy, should give the talk. Good morning, all. And let me also thank Dan Moon, the Environmental Business Council of New England, and my good friend, former State Senator Bill Golden. But I want to say today that our timing could not be more perfect, in the sense that our nation is beginning to have a conversation about the definition of and the resources available for infrastructure. And I want to state emphatically, flood issues, flood water is an infrastructure issue. Now, I bring to this also a significant amount of professional and business relationships. I was a very young real estate staffer on Fidelity Property staff when they were designated to develop the then steamship terminal and the 2 Commonwealth Flats. Today stands the World Trade Tower, as well as the Fidelity Hotel and the 2 office buildings. I negotiated that lease on behalf of Fidelity with Massport. Many, many years later, I have joined with John Davis and Robin Brown and Omni in developing the Omni Boston Seaport Hotel, 1,000+ rooms, which will complete the construction this July. And most recently, in February, I'm a co-developer with Lincoln Properties on Parcel H, just where the Silver Line comes out in the seaport. So I have personal interests, policy issues also with respect to flooding in the seaport. Just a few more comments. Clearly in 2018, when nor'easters created flooding in the designated world headquarters of General Electric at that time and the Seaport District, they had just broken ground. After the flood waters receded, it was rapidly clear to all that we must be developing plans to protect Boston and the real estate development boom that is led largely by our life science industry. Today, it is important to discuss regional planning so that we don't have individual municipalities trying to develop their own individual plan. Unity is strength. Clearly, we need billions of dollars of investment in our coastal resilience infrastructure, but we can't do it without a plan. And so it is my hope that today and subsequent conversations will result in two things. One, a comprehensive plan, but secondly, to ignite an interest in our congressional delegation and our governors to fight for infrastructure money that includes flooding in this national infrastructure bill that's being undertaken. Thank you very much again. Suffolk University is glad to join the Environmental Business Council and Bill Golden. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. Excellent overview, an indication of the challenges that are facing us right now. So with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Bill. Bill has been involved with environmental issues here in the Boston area forever, I guess, probably as long as I have, and has been involved in at various levels with the government, has been very involved in the development of the MWRA, for example. The Boston Harbor cleanup was a significant issue and probably on level with this issue that we're dealing with now in terms of dealing with the challenges of sea level rise and climate change and extreme weather events. So with that, Bill, I'm going to turn the program over to you, and thank you very much for all of your efforts in organizing these programs. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's been a pleasure to work with EBC, and I want to thank the Environmental Business Council of New England, the MWRA Advisory Board, and Richard Taylor's Suffolk University Center for Real Estate. We have great speakers today, and there will be essentially 4 takeaways. All around the world and all throughout our nation today, public and private sector leaders are looking at the existential threat of coastal flooding. This has been a growing awareness. There's been a trend away from what just a few years ago at the federal level was a singular focus on disaster relief, and a trend away from that focus as not an important focus, but not a singular focus, to the awareness that we have to focus on disaster prevention. So today, we're going to be looking at really 4 points of that question. One is the fact that in the United States today, coastal flooding is in fact an existential threat to many communities and many urban areas, such as New Orleans, such as Boston and the Port of New York, involving both New York and New Jersey, Charleston, all throughout Florida, the Gulf Coast, the South Coast around San Diego on the West Coast, and San Francisco, and throughout the great rivers, as we'll hear later today, of the country. Coastal flooding is a significant existential threat. So that's the first point. The second point is that if we're going to address this threat successfully, we are going to have to invest billions of dollars in both aging infrastructure and new infrastructure, both green and gray. And the good news is that thanks to the effort of our speakers and on a federal level of Senator Landrieu, and on a local level of Bill Hinckley, and in terms of PPP investments, Goldman Sachs and others, we are developing options for funding. And that will be the issue today. You know, we talk a lot about vulnerability, and there's been a tremendous amount of good work through the MVP program and coastal zone management in Massachusetts. Then we have progressed from looking at our coastal vulnerability to developing coastal resiliency plans. But in the end, when the planning is done, there's always that 800-pound gorilla that raises the hand in the back of the room and says, show me the money. Where is the money coming from to do all that? So we're lucky to have the options, but how do we access those options? You'll hear today from virtually every speaker that the money flows to those levels of government that have developed shovel-worthy and shovel-ready plans. If you don't have a master plan for a region, you're not going to get funded. We'll also hear today that regional plans are likely to be prioritized, and that regional planning is necessary and must begin now if we are going to access the $2 trillion infrastructure bill that we know is pending in Washington, and to access greater funding on a state and local level. So those are the takeaways. We have an existential threat. It's going to cost billions. We have funding options, but we need master plans on a regional basis to attract the optimum level of funding, both for the region and to connect that region to local municipal plans. If I can transition then into my presentation, which focuses on Boston Harbor as an example. So let me bring up my slideshow now. I think I can do this. Oh, Jesus, it worked. So anyway, take a look at this slide just for a moment. Every area of the coast is different, and every area of the coast is require a different kind of master plan and different types of investment in coastal resiliency infrastructure. But in Massachusetts, we have a tremendous opportunity. If you look at the map of Boston Harbor, to the east is Massachusetts Bay, and beyond that, the Atlantic Ocean. So that's to the right of this screen. And to the left, you have a magnificent harbor around which 15 cities and towns have developed over centuries to form the economic engine for New England and one of the great economic engines of the country. We are fortunate in the configuration of this geography to have barrier beaches that are formed and exist now as the town of Hull and the town of Winthrop. And that presents a very interesting opportunity for Boston that not all communities have, because we have the opportunity to do what the Dutch have been doing for centuries. It's a very simple theory. Their theory is if you have 175 miles of coastline, like we have in Boston Harbor, you want to shorten the coastline. And we have a tremendous opportunity to do that. It's a little over 4.5 miles between Deer Island and the tip of Hull. And in between, there are a number of islands that provide opportunities for land-based connections. If we build a Seagate system between Hull and Deer Island, we can shorten the coastal resiliency infrastructure investment perimeter to about 4.5 miles on a regional basis. What does that mean? Well, let's look at the region from a political demographics point of view. We have 15 cities and towns, as I mentioned, around Boston Harbor. Each one has developed a vulnerability assessment and has now a plan. And though that assessment and that plan are the result of a nationally leading program that CZM has administered very successfully to bring all communities up to date. And each community has now that vulnerability assessment in Boston Harbor and that vulnerability plan. I mean, that development plan. The issue is that those plans are just for that community. So right now, it's every community has it, but they're not interconnected as communities, and there's no regional plan. Why are we doing all this? Well, there are 3 separate phenomena that cause climate coastal flooding in Boston Harbor. One is subsidence. Subsidence is a result of the glaciers pressing down other areas of the land, and which are now rising, and other areas of the land which benefited from the glaciers in terms of elevation are now sinking. In Boston, our land is sinking, but it's sinking very slowly. It is not a major issue, although it exacerbates sea level rise and storm surge. The 2 major issues we're facing are sea level rise and storm surge. It's important, however, to distinguish from these. These are 2 separate phenomena. Sea level rise is gradual. It becomes potentially a very serious issue at the end of the century, late to end of the century, depending on glacial melt and ice cap melt. But right now it's very gradual, and at least in the near and midterm, very predictable as being maybe a foot to 2 feet by the middle of the next century. That foot or 2 feet that is necessary to protect against sea level rise doesn't have a major impact in terms of dividing the land from the water, either from a social point of view or from an infrastructure point of view. You can build a couple of feet of a seawall, to address sea level rise, much less expensively, and you can limit it to low-lying areas that are suffering nuisance flooding. The real imminent threat, and this is really interesting, you talk to a lot of people, they'll say sea level rise is the problem, and that's the one we have to immediately address. But it is storm surge that is the most imminent threat. We have a speaker today, Mary Landrieu, who lived through Katrina and can address that. Justin also lived through the Katrina and the response to Katrina. So we have seen what hurricanes can do. We've seen them in New York and New Jersey. If Sandy had just taken a left-hand turn a little later, we would have gotten the blow that New York and New Jersey suffered, where there was $90 billion worth of damage and almost 50 people died in a single day. Vast areas were damaged to the extent that they are still trying to recover. The tunnels under New York had to be totally reconditioned because the seawater that got into them not only destroyed the electrical system as originally thought, but actually destroyed the concrete in them. So these are terrible storms. Now up here, we have had bad hurricanes, the hurricane of 38, 2 hurricanes in 54. In fact, those hurricanes led to the Seagate system in New Bedford, which is a real example of how these systems can protect harbors for decades and decades reliably without failure and create significant and successful economic development. But here we have hit mostly by nor'easters. All of these storms are getting more frequent and stronger due to climate change. Hurricanes alone in 2020 set records, 30 named Atlantic storms, 12 of which hit the United States. 15 of the most destructive US storms in history have occurred since 2004. That's evidencing not only the destructive power of the storms, but how vulnerable we are because we've built up with such heavy investments on the coastline. People like water, they want to live on the water, they want to work on the water, and in private sector and the public sector have responded by investing heavily in residential and commercial structures that are very valuable and get damaged and cause tremendous losses. So because of the fact that sea level rise is happening over decades and storm surge devastation can happen anytime and is more devastating a threat than sea level rise, we need to consider sea level rise and storm surge as separate phenomenon and focus on storm surge devastation. In Boston, until 2016, people said we were different. We're not going to be hit by a Sandy or by a Katrina. And then, whoops, we got the king tides of 2016, and there was flooding around the coast. The Constitution, the USS Constitution, which has survived since the War of 1812, almost sank in its own dry dock when the flooding reached within inches of flooding the dry dock. We have the whole region was impacted because these situations don't respect political boundaries. And we had very severe public safety and security issues all around Boston Harbor, where public safety officials were risking their lives to save lives. Our economy as well was hit hard. As Richard Taylor mentioned, the GE headquarters, which had been a real success story up to then. The state and the city had competed very hard and very successfully to win General Electric's competition nationwide and get General Electric to move to Boston. Well, what happens? They break ground, they've just broken ground, and the site gets flooded. That site doesn't have the GE headquarters on it today. That headquarters is being built elsewhere in the seaport and other existing buildings. So that is just an example of what happened, of what can happen. We also saw tremendous damage from the nor'easters to the marine ecology of Boston Harbor. The Belle Island Marsh, for example, lost hundreds of species of flora and fauna, which are coming back, but indicated what happens when storms drive salt water deep within natural and valuable ecological regions. It also demonstrated social justice issues here. Flooding often occurs in very poor and low-income areas. And unfortunately, when you're responding only on a land-based strategy, you don't often attract the money to the lowest income bracketed areas. It often goes to the wealthiest areas. Oops. So we're advocating as an investment strategy that the Army Corps and other federal agencies understand and will respond to have what we call this layered defense system to justify optimum public funding. And why does a layered defense system justify optimum public funding? First, it is comprehensive. It creates the maximum benefit for the entire region by protecting the whole region. It is also justifies funding because it's regional. And as you'll hear from the speakers, regional plans and regional systems attract federal and state funding priority. And it has the impact of protecting public infrastructure, residential and commercial structures. It reduces flood-related building code costs that impose significant costs on economic development. It preserves asset value and public tax base. You have a hurricane or a nor'easter and people say, well, we're insured. How about preventing the damage rather than paying for the damage afterwards and avoiding business disruption and the other costs that may not be covered by insurance? It also, a regional system can improve municipal and corporate bond ratings. As you lose coastline and as you have to zone out development, you have a reduced tax base, and that can affect not only funding the operations of the municipality, but also its bond rating and increasing borrowing costs. It reduces business disruption costs, as I mentioned, but it also reduces insurance costs. If in fact, we build a regional Seagate system from Hull to Deer Island, one of the benefits of that is to create an X zone inside that Seagate system that eliminates or reduces for private insurance purposes, but it eliminates mandatory federal, FEMA, and other flood insurance premiums. That could be up to $1 billion by the end of the century that would be saved by a Seagate system that is designed to be an accredited levy. The reduction in cost of permanent land-based, if we come with a regional plan before we build out these land-based coastal resiliency infrastructure systems that are planned now by all of the 15 cities and towns, they won't have to invest so much in those perimeter structures. They won't have to be a combined system for both sea level rise and storm surge. They'll be smaller, they'll be less intrusive on community uses, and they will be more easily constructed and less costly. It will also reduce stormwater pumping and retention facilities. We had the senior engineer of the Boston Water and Sewer Commission on our last webinar, John Sullivan. And John Sullivan has been with the Boston Water and Sewer Commission for 49 years. He's one of the most respected stormwater and water and sewer system operators in the world. And he made the point that coastal facilities are great for keeping out seawater. But if you have only coastal facilities and you don't have a regional facility and lower coastal facilities, they're great until it rains. And then you have a major stormwater problem within that wall that separates the ocean from the land. And you need to invest tremendously in water pumping and retention facilities. So this system reduces both public and private costs. So there have been, I'm sorry, I skipped there. Let me just, the option of a regional layered defense system that can secure federal and state funding merits an in-depth feasibility study. There has been a preliminary study done by UMass Boston by their sustainability lab. However, in that study, right in the study, and I quote, on page 173, it says one option not explored, is a hybrid system. Well, that's exactly what we're proposing with a layered defense system. That is a hybrid solution. That has not been looked at. So one option not explored has been the system that really is, I believe, the optimum system for attracting federal and state funds and for protecting the entire region. So in doing that study, we've come up with some very interesting alternative locations that were not looked at in the UMass study. I direct your attention to the one in the upper left-hand corner, which is one that addresses one of the major issues in the UMass study. The UMass study had a 1,500-foot gate, something that had never been built before. And that required, because of its uniqueness, a standard deviation consideration that increased the cost of that. First, the cost of the gate itself doubled the project by 100%. And then doubled the cost. And then it had to be increased by 50% and 100% because of the standard deviation issue. But that 1,500-foot gate had never been built anywhere in the world. And of course, building something that's never been built anywhere in the world is an obvious obstruction to any consideration of such a solution. In this location, however, you have a direct approach to these gates. You don't have the navigational problems. You don't need a 1,500-foot gate. In fact, you could build two 600-foot gates, which not only give you an ingress and an egress where ships could be going through at the same time, but you have it in a situation where you have a resiliency of belt and suspenders. If something should happen with one gate, you wouldn't be closing the port. That is kind of the in-depth cost-benefit feasibility analysis that has to go on so that we get that regional master plan that's necessary to attract funding. But we must act now. We've got an imminent threat that must be addressed. And yet to date, we do not have the necessary shovel-worthy regional master plan required to secure maximum federal funding from the Biden-Harris federal $2 trillion infrastructure proposal. In conclusion, we know this is an existential threat that requires a multi-billion-dollar investment to protect the 15 cities and towns that flood through Boston Harbor. To optimize federal, state, and local funding, we must act now to develop a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers acceptable shovel-worthy regional master plan focused on coastal resiliency's layered defense system. Now, why do we need a plan that's acceptable to the Army Corps and to other federal agencies? We're just simply not going to get the money if we come up with some exotic plan that they don't feel will work. We just will not get prioritized investment. So to obtain funds in a timely fashion, this regional coastal resiliency master plan must begin immediately with an in-depth economic feasibility cost-benefit analysis that includes our Commonwealth of Massachusetts social and environmental justice goals and other core community values. You hear more about how these plans have been developed in Louisiana and elsewhere, and why such a plan is absolutely necessary and must begin now if we're going to proceed in addressing this existential threat. So thank you very much. And I would like to now open this to and introduce our next speaker. Senator Mary Landrieu is a national leader from the epicenter of coastal resiliency planning and development, namely Louisiana. No other state has suffered as much as Louisiana from the devastation of sea level rise and storm surge. It has been the epicenter of coastal resiliency issues in the United States throughout the history of the country. And so nowhere in this country is there an area that has focused on this issue as much and has planned as much and has attracted as much funding as the Gulf area in general and Louisiana in particular. And in fact, Mary is the leader of this effort and has been for for a long time. She has led on the state and local level as a state representative and has been a leader on the federal level as a 16-year, three-term, US Senator. Now she's a senior policy advisor, kind of a Washington insider, if you will, with her ear to the White House and to Congress, working with Van Ness Feldman. And I don't believe there's anywhere anywhere in the world is a person that understands coastal resiliency and has lived the challenges of coastal resiliency as much as Senator Landrieu. And it is my great pleasure to have her with us today and to introduce her now.
Bill, thank you so very, very much for that lovely introduction. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I most certainly agree that I've spent a great deal of my life in political office being focused on this issue for my state, for the region, and for the country as best I could. But I just really want to thank Daniel and thank you for your leadership. I'm very intrigued by this Environmental Business Council and really want to learn more about how you all are organized and what you do, because as we move forward, you know, the challenges of infrastructure are just so integrated with our economic development hopes and dreams and opportunities for our country. And this environmental transition that we're going through, whether it's clean energy or coastal resiliency, is just paramount. So I thank your region for being a leader in that kind of fusion between, you know, finance and environment and economic health, and also economic and racial justice as well. And Bill, your leadership has been terrific. And I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm so glad you did it. Because while I might be an expert in talking, which I'm going to do for 15 minutes, I'm still not very good like at slides and everything. So I have one of my wonderful staffers from Van Ness Spellman, and my firm is excellent, Van Ness Spellman, and all of these sort of slides and details and charts. And I used to carry them around, you know, when I was a senator, as many charts as I could make to kind of just show the senators and show the representatives what we were talking about. Because in many parts of the country, if you didn't experience a disaster, like a serious one, it was hard for senators and House members to get their heads around it. So I thank you for your charts and graphs. I'm going to share 3 kind of thoughts with you all this morning, and I'm going to stay on all morning and be here for the question and answers. And then you'll be able to contact us if you want later, you know, for more, whatever we can do to help. But I just have to make one historical point before I start, in honor of my father, who's still alive, who's 90 years old. And those of you that are as old as I am on this call will remember Kevin White, who was mayor of Boston. Well, my father was mayor of New Orleans when Kevin White was mayor of Boston. I was a kid. I was in my teenager. And I remember him talking so much about the Boston recovery and the Boston harbor. And it's just been a great part of my life, remembering it, thinking of it, visiting it, going there and seeing the amazing changes that have happened since, you know, the 1960s and 70s. And so I looked at a video of it, an old video that you all have on, you know, somebody's got it on Google or whatever, internet. And it just reminded me of when we work together as a community, how much we can accomplish. It doesn't seem like we can. It seems overwhelming. It seems like we'll never find the money or the plan. But you all know in Boston what your harbor looked like back in the 1970s, and you look at it today. And I was just with Tom Carper walking on, you know, with Joe Biden's inaugural, walking with Senator Tom Carper, who was governor of Delaware, what that river looked like before he was governor and what it looks like now. And people of goodwill, if you have the right leadership like Bill has provided for this region, we can do it. So I'll just say that. I'm going to share 3 things. 1, you can trust me on this. The federal government, for whatever reason, has not yet adequately focused on a major funding stream or a major tax credit scheme, or focused, I don't want to use the word scheme, but structure to really support the development of coastal communities and their resilience on any coast, anywhere in the country. Sheldon Whitehouse and I rack our brains about why this is. And we could spend hours discussing the philosophies or theories of this. All I can say, my feeling or my history teaches me that the country's been so focused on the interior, moving west, all the growth, was sort of westward in the last century. Our ports were some of our first communities, but we forgot them. We just forgot them. And 60% of the country lives within 50 miles of a coast. But if you look at the way the federal government spends its money, and I know that we have our North Dakota people on today, so I apologize for this, but a lot of the money is spent in our interior, whether it's our highways, not so much our bridges, highways, et cetera. The Corps of Engineers has been traditionally underfunded. So why do I say this? Because on August 29th in 2005, Katrina hit New Orleans and 1,800 people lost their lives. 1,800 either drowned or got lost in the floodwaters. Some bodies people have never been found. And 70% of the residential area of the city of New Orleans, 70% of every neighborhood, poor and rich, middle class and lower income. The lower Ninth Ward, which was 95% predominantly African-American, but not as poor as people think, even though they were lower income, lots of businesses, lots of working families, lots of homeowners. Right across the railroad track from St. Bernard Parish, they both, which was 95% white, and we're not always that segregated, we're a more integrated community, but this is just one example, both went underwater. There wasn't a home not destroyed. Now, if Boston can get its head, or some communities in Maine, North Dakota knows about this with the floods in Fargo, gets their head around what it looks like to have 10 and 15 and 20 feet of water inside of a person's home up to the roof. So when people come home, they have to come by boat and climb into their second floor. That is a pretty devastating. I'm not even talking about what happened to our hotels and the 2 and 3 and 4 feet of water in our downtown and everything. The only thing that survived was a high ridge, etc. That woke me up. I realized that our federal government was asleep at the wheel. If a city like this could go underwater this way, and I came back to Washington after 6 weeks of being on the ground, and my brother and I and many other people, literally hauling people out of the water with our bare hands. Not me, my brother did that, and a bunch of others. I was helping in other ways. And I came to Washington and it was like, oh, I'm so sorry you all had that event. Let's move on. That is what prompted me to get into this fight, and I've been in it ever since. So here are some funding opportunities. FEMA basically, after Katrina, we, rattled the cages, and FEMA now has become somewhat of a pre-disaster mitigation planning, this BRIC program, BRIC. Follow it, Google it. It's really come out of a long history since Katrina of fighting for not just money after the storm occurs, when everybody's traumatized and trying to rebuild as fast as you can, and you can't really think about planning like Bill's talking about in a regional, calm, thoughtful, leading by science. When you're building after a storm, people like throw the science out. I just want to get back to my business, or I just want to get back to my house. So finally, right now, the opportunity is in the stimulus package. FEMA is positioned to, and President Biden has talked about this. It's exciting in a lot of ways. Not only could it be part of stimulus, but it's an off budget, even without the deficit spending that stimulus might do, this big $2 trillion plan, because it taps into the FEMA money, a certain percentage of it, and it sets it aside. And so there's the first $500 million that's out, for this kind of regional approach, and I can give you more detail about that. But basically the funding has come through FEMA, most of it post-disaster, but now this BRIC program is coming for coastal resiliency now. I passed, when I was in the Senate, a bill called GOMESA, Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. Now, the Gulf Coast has something that no other coast has. We have an active drilling of oil and gas, which we've been doing for many, many years. We've drilled 40,000 wells. Yes, we've had, disasters, but we've done it mostly safely, and the country's benefited from the resources we give. I realize you all can't do that on the East Coast or the West Coast. It's an anathema. But we generate off of the Gulf Coast. The people of Louisiana, these, some people who don't even have drinking water in some of our communities, go to work every day, and we generate $6 billion roughly every year from taxes paid by the industry, not, income tax, but taxes, royalties, severances, bonuses. So the GOMESA Act took a portion of that, a small portion. We asked for 50%. We got a cap, arbitrary cap lifted, but it has generated several $100 million a year since I can't think, the last, 12 years for Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi. Louisiana created a master plan by constitutional amendment. All the money we get from GOMESA goes to our master plan. And you'll hear from Justin Earnsworth, who's part of our, Gulf Coast Research Group, Gulf Coast Research Center, how that master plan has come together. But the stream of revenue was from offshore, oil and gas. But there's a bill called the RISE Act right now. So this is the second opportunity. BRIC is the first through this sort of FEMA pre-disaster planning, new idea that sort of grew out of all of our work after Katrina and Sandy and what you all went through with the nor'easters. That's good. Then there's a RISE Act. Now, Sheldon Whitehouse is the man. Sheldon Whitehouse is the leader of all things coastal in the Senate and the House. I've not seen anyone work as hard as Sheldon has to try to explain to the Senate and the House how really little money, relatively speaking, is going to the coast. I'll give you an example. This is going to make you mad. I'll do it quickly. New Mexico, one state, has oil and gas just like we do, but their oil and gas is inside of their state. Ours is 3 miles out, and all the coastal states have different miles. I don't know what Boston's or the New England are, but along the coast, it's either 3 or 10, depending on how you came into the Union. Outside of that is federal waters. Well, New Mexico has drilling on land. They drilled last year enough money, the year before, to send $1 billion to the federal government. But under the law, New Mexico kept $1 billion. They can spend that $1 billion on anything they want: schools, bridges, water, parks. There are no restrictions. Louisiana sent off of our shore $4 billion, and we got, I don't know, $200 million. And we restricted ourselves. Our money goes to coastal. So there are laws that send money to these Western states that the coastal states just don't ever touch. And so the RISE Act attempts to set up revenue sharing with the wind resources that are coming off of New England's coast primarily, just announced recently. You all know that. And so the RISE Act taps these new revenues that'll come in from these wind resources and give them to the host states, give a portion, 50%, 37%. That money will go to you guys. It's being, structured now. So talk to Sheldon Whitehouse. Tim Kaine has been phenomenal on this. Angus King has been great on it. Talk to these guys, and that's another opportunity. My third point is this. We have got to build something along the line, like Bill said, a coastal coalition for the whole country. We have to stand together and fight together for funding to come in a layered approach, some through the Corps of Engineers, some through FEMA, some through HUD, tap into the resources that are there, but also demand more focus on coastal communities. Mike Bennett, good friend of mine, great senator from Colorado. He is asking right now for $60 billion in his program, $60 billion pending right now, to basically move $60 billion to Western states for a whole bunch of issues. Well, he says it's for the whole country. the way the bill is structured and what it will go for is really sort of directed back again to the interior. Like the Interior Department is truly interior. It's supposed to be for all 50 states interior, but it focuses on these Western states, some of whom who get a lot of money, some of whom don't get very much, but at least they get more than the coast, where all the people live and really where the danger is. So we should have like a $60 billion coastal fund to match. And I'm going to be talking to some people about that. So to conclude, because I know I only have a few minutes, Bill is absolutely correct. You have to have a regional approach, which is so hard politically to do. And God bless you, because we have to pull Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama together. So y'all say prayers for me. That is a very difficult thing for us to pull our 4 states together. And you know, the politics is pretty tough. We also have to pull 20 parishes in Louisiana together, all 20, from New Orleans, which is big, to Plaquemines, which is small. And there's a lot of discussion going on about how to do our master plan right now with these big diversions. But I want to shout out to the Gulf Coast Institute, shout out to CPRA, and I represent CPRA, Coastal Restoration Protection Authority, which runs the master plan for Louisiana. And I also want to give a shout out to every single one of Louisiana's governors, Republican and Democrat, because we've done this amazingly in Louisiana, I guess because we're so damn scared. And Katrina made us so upset. And it's not just Katrina, but Rita, Laura, all the storms that have hit us, like people are just like, we can't fight about this anymore. We have to come together. So we have a master plan. We're ready to go with our Go Mesa money, with our RISE Act money. And then we had that tragedy. Remember, the Deepwater Horizon blew up. Well, a bill that I pushed through, again, with Sheldon Whitehouse's help. I mean, he's been phenomenal on this. With his help, he understood how this penalty money needed to go. So we got $40 billion through the Restore Act for the Gulf Coast. So when Bill says, where is the money? We have our money. We don't have all of it that we need, but between Go Mesa, between the Restore Act, and between what we're going to get when we pass this RISE Act, we will have a big part of our $50 billion master plan, not all of it. But you don't want to have to build yours on tragedy. You want to have a stream of revenue, and the federal government owes it to us. We generate so much economic power along our coast for the federal government, and the money that they get in that treasury, a lot of it comes from our people that work those docks, that fish those boats, that, you know, build our coastal communities. And this is a big fight. So I will support everything that you all want to do. We've got to organize our coast. We all don't have to support oil and gas drilling. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that whatever activity you do off your shore and that goes to the federal government benefits the federal government and federal waters. Those host states deserve a portion of it. And then we need to do what Bill said with the Corps of Engineers. And the final thing I have to say before I'll let y'all go is look to the Netherlands. I don't know another country that has done more work over longer periods of time, harder periods of time than the Netherlands. And what I love about the Netherlands is they're wonderful engineers, and they're very, very smart, of course, but they also have a great DNA to their environment, because unlike the United States, they're a tiny little country. They're not big like us. And so we just waste land and we just walk away from places. They can't, they have no place to walk away. They either save their country and save the land that they're on, or they all go to live in Germany or Belgium, or, you know, whatever the area is. So they are so wonderful about this. They've taught me so much. I've led 4 delegations of elected officials to the Netherlands. That's how we built our to model Del Taurus, which is, I think, the world leader, Del Taurus. You should Google it, look it up. 800 scientists, blah, 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 blah. They do all this work all over the world. And we can do that. But our Corps of Engineers is not structured correctly. Good people, but they just don't have the flexibility, and they don't have enough money. They don't have the flexibility, and they can't move fast enough. We have to build something much faster. And then the private sector, there's so much capital out there in the private sector. I am not an expert on this, trust me. So don't listen to me, listen to other people from Boston. But I know that there's a lot of private capital out there. And if the federal government could just figure out how to harness it through some sort of resiliency tax credit, or, Liberty bonds, or building, coastal communities, or all communities, and leverage the power of our private sector, we can do this and we can get America safe and secure. We are not. And Bill is right. It is not just sea level rise. These storms are more powerful, more frightening, and people don't have any idea what's about to hit them. So thank you all. I'm happy to help. We're trying our best along the Gulf Coast, but believe me, we need the Eastern Seaboard to connect with us for your power and your money, and your power and your know-how to connect, and then get the West Coast connected too. So that's what I wanted to say. I'll stop there, and happy to answer any questions in the panel. Thank you all so much.
Senator, thank you. Boston believes it's the hub of the universe. And so we often believe that we are so unique that we can't learn anything from anyone else. Unfortunately, we have this parochialism in Boston. And we are very privileged to have Senator Markey and Senator Warren as our senators. But I want to nominate you as our ex officio Senator Emeritus, because we need you. We need you. And Vanessa Feldman is very fortunate to have you as a policy advisor, senior policy advisor. And I know you are in there hitting as hard, working for them as you have as a senator to advance this coastal resiliency agenda. You are just one terrific person and a national asset. As Mary Landrieu, the senator, said, the Netherlands has Deltaris, which is their world famous independent nonprofit applied research institution that advances science and develops integrated methods to solve complex environmental and societal challenges. Well, look out, Deltaris, because you are going to be overtaken by our institute, the Water Institute, which is under the leadership of our next speaker, Justin Ahrensworth. Justin is now only the second president and CEO of the Water Institute. He is a born leader. He has had an amazing career. Before becoming the CEO and president of the Water Institute, Justin was the executive director of the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Council. And that was created after the Deepwater Horizon spills, and Justin established the council as an independent federal agency and oversaw all aspects of its programmatic, technical, and operational activities. What does this mean? Justin had billions of dollars, billions, from the fines and other fees paid as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And it was his responsibility to allocate those fees and to use them for coastal resiliency purposes in the Gulf. In doing so, he showed international class, world-class leadership, and developed a reputation that had been previously built on his tour of duty in Washington, D.C., where he was chief of staff to the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Commerce, our own Cam Carey, and previously working as general counsel and other positions in Washington. Justin is truly one of the bright lights on coastal resiliency, and has worked very closely with Senator Landrieu on her leadership efforts. So we're really privileged to have Justin. Thank you, Justin, for fitting us in on your schedule. I know it was really tight today. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate that that introduction. Great. Well, Bill, first, thank you very much. I am my roots in politics and in government and public service do go back to Massachusetts and to both Cam Carey and his older brother, Secretary Carey. And I'm also honored, Bill, to share a common, very close friend in our mutual buddy, John Rotenberg, who of course has been involved in these issues. And it's also a pleasure and honor to follow Senator Landrieu. I would not ever think to tease a United States senator, but I suppose I tease in the sense of Senator Landrieu really was the principal architect of the Restore Act, which was the legislation that brought the BP oil spill dollars back to the Gulf Coast. And that consumed a big chunk of my professional career and was a wonderful experience. And she was also the visionary behind the Water Institute of the Gulf. And so the teasing is, please do let me know your next idea so that I know where my career is going to go, because I tend to follow your excellent ideas. But it's a pleasure to share some of these, share a few thoughts with the group today. Louisiana, in many ways, we find ourselves as the canary in the coal mine. That's not something we choose here, but our story really does, for the Water Institute and in what I'll share this morning, it really does in many ways go to Hurricane Katrina. And so, of course, after Hurricane Katrina, and Senator Landrieu may have shared some of these reflections earlier, there was a recognition in South Louisiana. Obviously, we have major water challenges. Who does this the best in the world? And as Bill said, the group from Louisiana, their eyes went to the Netherlands, and rightly so, because Deltares, again, as Bill said, was and is the premier coastal deltaic and riverine applied research group in the world. Our colleagues from Louisiana took some trips to the Netherlands, visited the flood risk reduction projects that the Dutch have invested in since the 1953, sort of their Hurricane Katrina moment, that terrible storm from the North Sea that killed 1,500 or so folks. And we're not just impressed by the projects, but also by the fact that science and thoughtful and smart planning really underscores all of their work. And the stakes are, of course, very high for the Dutch. But for this work, they would all be Germans, because 90% of the Netherlands is below sea level. So we learned a lot from that. And our group from Louisiana, back by around about 2011, 2012, formed the Water Institute. And this is our headquarters in Baton Rouge. Well, it was still under construction, right on the banks of the Mississippi River in Baton Rouge, on what is called now the Water Campus, where we have both the state government lead agency on coastal restoration matters for Louisiana is located across the street. We have colleagues from the university world, from the private sector consulting world, and government. And we tend to think of those three, government, academia, and private sector consulting, as the golden triangle. And we as an applied research group try to operate within that triangle, if you will, and working with all the parties. So what I thought I would do, because I know we don't have a lot of time and I'd like to leave time for your comments and thoughts, is say a little bit about the challenge that we face in Louisiana, and then talk about the plan, the Coastal Master Plan that we have in place, the blood, sweat, and tears that we went through to get where we are, and then conclude with a few thoughts around the benefit cost analysis and some work that we're doing there. As we prepared for this meeting, Bill suggested that would be a very an important topic to hit, and so I thought I would. So first, just to sort of set the stage of our challenge, we have an existential land loss crisis in Louisiana. We are losing a football field of land every 100 minutes. Used to be every hour, so it's improved a slight bit, but we've lost about the size of Delaware in land since the 1930s. And I always like to say, there are countries that have gone to war for that amount of territory. So this is a very serious matter, of course, here. One of the challenges, and I would really highly recommend thought to in particular, our colleagues in Massachusetts to learn from our lessons learned and mistakes and whatever you'd like to call it, our experience, I suppose, is that we have a centralized state agency, the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority. We didn't always have a state agency that was focused on this. The joke used to be that the Louisiana Secretary of Department of Natural Resources would see the Louisiana Secretary of Department of Transportation and some other secretaries coming in and out of various congressional offices on the Hill, all asking for separate appropriations to work on similar issues. Needless to say, there were multiple entities that had competing and overlapping interests and equities in resiliency and coastal protection. That was a problem. And so in addition to creating the Water Institute, an independent outside of state government, nonprofit applied research group, there was within state government the creation of the CPRA, Coastal Protection Restoration Authority. And you see on this slide their mission. It really is it can be reduced, I think, to two core pieces. One is to restore, the other is to protect. So everything from levees and floodgates to replenishing our coastal wetlands falls within a coordinated new state agency. And also importantly, there's the state agency that is the CPRA, and then there is the governor's executive assistant for coastal activities. That is a person who sits in the governor's office, who is above any one state secretary. This person is currently, the incumbent is a guy named Chip Klein. Chip serves as this governor's executive assistant. He also serves as the chairman of the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority board. So the CPRA, and I apologize for dwelling on the bureaucracy, but I do think it's important. CPRA, state agency run by an executive director, equivalent to other state agencies. Then inside the governor's office, there is an executive assistant for coastal activities who serves as the chairman of the board, effectively, of this state agency. That individual in the governor's office is able to use the governor's convening power, as well as executive authorities, to bring together not just CPRA, but multiple state agencies. And again, if you're talking about a a coast-wide approach, I think having that kind of organization within state government is just so important. Bill was sharing some things that even though I've lived in Massachusetts for a period of time, I didn't appreciate that there are no counties and there's 350 some municipalities and local political subdivisions. That is from where we sit down here, that's unworkable to try to do what it is that we're doing. And I say that through, again, blood, sweat, and tears. We have parishes rather than counties down here. We also have levee boards, multiple levee boards that cover coastal Louisiana, as well as various other political subdivisions, New Orleans, the city of New Orleans, Sewage and Water Board, lots of different players. Until there was a centralized state authority, this work was piecemeal, and I think far from where we are today. So I apologize for dwelling on that governance piece of it, but I do think we've certainly learned a lot from the creation of it. So I really, I've covered some of these elements here. The main prong, and I'll skip to really the last bullet point here, is that in addition to centralized state authority around coastal protection and restoration, there was a recognition that there needed to be a coordinated plan, clear goals, objectives, and it needed to be updated. It was originally being updated every 5 years. So we were on a 2007, 2012, 2017. Next version, which we're working on right now, is 2023. So the legislature moved it to every 6 years now for some thoughtful reasons. One other important point here is that this plan that's updated every 5, now 6 years, goes to the legislature for approval. But, and this is again, I think, very important, as from something we've learned from, there is no, it's an up or down across the board. You make one vote. There are no amendments that can be issued. There are no line item vetoes, if you will, on particular projects. And there's a very important reason for that. And that really is, and I'll go to and say a little bit about the 2012 version of our plan. There's a lot of politics in Louisiana. There's a lot of politics in Massachusetts and many other places. But one of the things that I think is core to our work, both at the Water Institute, at the state of Louisiana, and this master plan, is the idea is that we want science to mitigate politics. I didn't say eliminate politics. You never eliminate politics, but you want the projects that are invested in to be the right ones, and I put that in quotes, but the right ones based on the best available science. What you wouldn't want to see is you would not want to see projects built in a particular area because there's a powerful state senator or representative or political figure. Because you would hate to see, certainly in the Louisiana context, a project built in an area that can't be sustained. We know that the science says can't be sustained. And so how can you allow science to really inoculate the process from political interference? We don't have the money or the time for politics involved in this, in the selection of projects in particular. And so that's why, again, a big part of what the Water Institute does is we never advocate for any one project, but our role in supporting the state in the master plan is to evaluate hundreds of possibilities against one common framework for one common plan. And we look at those alternatives and we use advanced numerical models, both looking at physical and natural effects, but also on social, on the human dimension, as we refer to it. And we have lots and lots of public input and engagement, not just the old fashioned, you get your 2 minutes at the microphone, but really we do what we call coastal conversations, and we have participatory modeling because it's not just a belief in the importance of public input, but these are life and death, literally, kind of issues. What communities can be protected? What communities might we determine at some point simply cannot be protected? We cannot make the investments with sea level rise and subsidence and the other stressors that we find to protect in the long term. And those kind of gut-wrenching decisions simply cannot be based on politics. So the importance of science in all of this can't be, I think, understated. Our plan in Louisiana is a 50-year, $50 billion plan. And I should say that the number 50 billion was not sort of scientifically arrived at, if you will. There was a recognition that you had to pick some number, right? Because you could have a $300 billion plan. So saying, let's call it 50, allows us a planning horizon, something to work towards. I should say we have identified about 20 billion of the 50 in the plan, and there's certainly another at least $50 billion worth of projects that many would like to see done. But I think having some kind of gating structure, if you will, around the scope of a plan is very important. So I'll say a little bit about the objectives. Obviously, flood risk reduction is a big deal here and in all coastal environments. How to work with nature. This is really, I think, a cornerstone of our work and in this plan. This is probably not the right forum unless there are specific questions, but we're currently working on some of the largest environmental restoration projects that are also flood risk reduction projects, probably in human history, in diverting the Mississippi River. So we're building controlled structures, basically cutting a hole in the levee and building in effect, this is a bad analogy, but effectively a garage door that you can open and allow the Mississippi River to move through, which would then harvest the sediment and build back the wetlands using the natural powers of the river. There are, of course, major trade-offs by introducing so much fresh water into an estuarine environment like that, but it's a corner stone, if you will, of our coastal master plan. And so, how to protect our habitat, our way of life, is just key, and then also the recognition that we're a working coast. The energy industry is very important across the Louisiana Gulf Coast, and so how do you take all of that and think about ways for us to sustain as much as we can and build as much resilience as possible? That's really the objective of this master planning effort. And I won't go into this in detail, but this gives you a bit of a snapshot of the Louisiana coast. And if you look towards the bottom of this slide, you see the different types of projects that are considered throughout this plan. The 50 billion is about split between marsh creation and habitat restoration and more traditional protection measures. And I'll get into that a little bit. So why are we updating this plan every 5 to 6 years? Why not just say, we got a plan and now the name of the game is financing, which I will definitely discuss. But really, there's a recognition on a couple of respects. Certainly, from the applied science perspective, we recognize that you have to adaptively manage your planning process. You need a plan, but and you don't want to blow that plan up every 5 years and start over. But what you do want to do is you want to look back and say, all right, what's been successful, what's not. You want to do that at the project level, but also at the master planning level. And so we have now we spent a lot of time on the adaptive management aspects of projects and ultimately planning. We improve our models for each iteration of the master plan. So I really, it's a lesson learned that highly recommend to any other state to consider. of really investing in that macro level planning, but recognizing that it needs to be updated and adapted over time. And I should also say that right now for the Water Institute, we are, of course, doing lots of work in Louisiana on this planning process as well. We've also just started developing the first coastal master plan and resilience strategy for the Commonwealth of Virginia. That's very exciting because as far as we understand it, it's really the second state or Commonwealth to follow Louisiana in a planning process of this nature. So I think that there's a lot that we can collectively learn from the Virginia experience, and we're encouraged to see more states. South Carolina has been talking about this kind of thing. We're doing some similar work in Texas. So really is a methodology that, I suppose to reduce it to its most base, you got to have a plan. You have to have a coordinated plan. You need to avoid what we not so lovingly refer to as random acts of restoration. If you just do a little thing here and a little thing there, 10 years from now, you look back at those little projects, they might be nice projects, they may be very worthy, but when you're talking about the macro level environmental stressors of sea level rise and climate change, subsidence, and so many other things, harsher storms, more frequent, random acts of restoration aren't going to cut it. So the advantage, I've tried to hit on a bunch of these things. When the Deepwater Horizon oil spill hit, one of the things that we saw in Louisiana is that, and I hope that this never occurs again in the Gulf or anywhere else, but the unexpected will happen. And having a plan, I will say at the time, as Bill said, I was working when the oil spill happened. I was working in the federal government and then ultimately across the Gulf of Mexico. There are 5 states down here. Louisiana was the only one that had a comprehensive science-based plan. And as a result, they have been able to get more money, spend more money, and do more work. And that's not to, say that Texas and Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida aren't good or don't have smart people. But Louisiana had a distinct advantage because we had a thoughtful science-based plan. And so the various funding streams that, whether they were federal or otherwise, that required thoughtful proposals based on science, based on studies. Well, when you have that upfront work done, you avoid the random acts of restoration because you've already thought macro level, what do we need to do? And B, you're ready to go to move to the grant application phase. And that was a major advantage for the state of Louisiana. So you're able to take from that macro plan funding streams and kind of connect the dots, if you will, between those funding streams and the projects within that plan. So I'll say a little bit about the actual, the guts of the plan and how it works.
Hey, Justin.
Yes.
Just want to let you know you have about 2 to 3 minutes left.
All right. Well, then I'll do this all very quickly and then hit the BCA. So I'm going to summarize the planning framework in these couple of slides in really saying one thing, which is that, and I'll go to this slide and the following. There was a lot of coordination. There's an advanced amount of numerical models and planning level models that went into this, and it requires a lot of different partners, as you can see here. And the end result of that is that you can have a thoughtful, coordinated, science-based plan, but I think that the upfront investment of time in thinking across the coastline is key. And in the 90 seconds that remain, I'll say one quick thing about, there are some highlights here of all that has been accomplished by Louisiana. I will touch on the fact that now in Louisiana, in addition to our coastal master plan, we're also coordinating across watersheds throughout the state. So it's even another lesson learned that you can't only look at the coastal zone when it comes to flood risk reduction and resilience, but we're also looking inland as a result of some very significant inland floods that we received and dealt with in 2016. But to just close out with this benefit cost analysis piece, I'll just say, Jackson, before the Academy Award music starts, there's a recognition that with the Corps of Engineers and many other federal agencies, and this happens at the state level as well, how do you quantify the benefits of a project when you're talking about resiliency? Traditionally, what I think perpetuates what many call environmental injustice is when you look at the property value of a particular area and how much does it cost to build a wall. So when you do that, you end up protecting Miami Beach. because the property values are very high and you can build a wall. Well, how do you monetize and quantify the environmental benefits and the social benefits of nature-based solutions that can work together with more traditional gray infrastructure around flood risk reduction? So I highlight this because I think this is one of the challenges for all of us in this space and in this work. And right now, in fact, it was what we were working on this morning, a meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers leadership to really, and I won't for the sake of time go into details, but to really go through the methodology of the benefit cost analysis for the Corps and for other federal agencies, and be much more thoughtful about how it is that we quantify those benefits so that the full suite of resilience projects can rise to the top. So I do apologize for perhaps not managing the time as well as I could, but I guess there's simply so much that we have learned the hard way in our work in Louisiana, and so it's exciting for us to see this kind of interest in New England and in Massachusetts, and we really stand ready to assist and help in any way that we can. So Jackson, if there's any time for questions or comments, happy to take them. But if I burned it all, happy to follow up with folks over email or phone if that's better.
First of all, Justin, thank you so very much. I have concluded long ago that I wanted you to be involved in what we're doing in Massachusetts. I've had many discussions with our good friend John Rodenberg, who has been such a fantastic public policy leader in the state for decades as a state rep and as the head of the Robert Kennedy Action Corps and other major positions. And we have talked about bringing you here. And I really, I think everybody that's listened to you today realize that the Water Institute and your leadership and what you've done in Louisiana and what you're now presently doing in Virginia just has to be done in Massachusetts now. We need a master plan, and we need exactly the kind of master plan that the Water Institute develops. And I believe that we need to have a serious discussion in Massachusetts about the role of the executive and the legislature in formulating this policy, because you have, with measured judgment, been able to establish a balance between the executive branch and the legislature and science in a way that is really the best formula for good public policy. So thank you very much for everything you've done and for providing your leadership nationally. And I really want to talk to you about bringing the Water Institute to Massachusetts to develop our master plan.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Bill. And you say when, we'd love to, we'd love nothing more than the opportunity to collaborate. In fact, actually, we're collaborating with a number of folks from Cambridge, Massachusetts on various elements of our scientific work and carbon capture and that kind of thing. And so it would be a great pleasure and honor. It's really part of our mission to look for opportunities to learn from other areas and bring the insights that we've gathered from Louisiana. So you say when, and hopefully there'll be a plane landing in Logan, and we'll see you.
Well, I plan to invite you and Mary as a dynamic duo that comes here and brings us towards the promised land of coastal resiliency. So thank you so much, Justin, for taking the time today.
Thank you. So
our next speakers are going to directly address what was one of the main topics of our breakout session. We have long labored with the Army Corps of Engineers on coastal resiliency projects and on navigational projects. And the Corps has wonderful people that work in the Corps. They work within an institutional framework that is, in my mind, not only old, but to some extent archaic. And to develop new ways of adjusting the Corps to the new realities of coastal resiliency and the other issues they deal with is absolutely imperative. One of the issues in addressing coastal resiliency through the Corps is the fabled and legendary time it takes to get the Corps from concept to construction. And the importance of the next presentation can be summarized, I think, at least as a major focus in the fact that the gentlemen that are about to talk to you, Messrs. Paulson and Nicholson, have in fact brought a project from conception to the pouring of concrete and the building of steel in 10 years, not 20 years, not even 15 years, and certainly not 30 years as was envisioned in the UMass study for the time it would take to build a layered defense system here in Boston, but in 10 years. And this is a very, very important story in terms of our examination of funding. This has been a really extraordinary project requiring extraordinary intelligence, professionalism, and capability. And I'm very privileged to introduce the next speakers who have led this project and are uniquely qualified to talk to us about this new pilot program from the Army Corps of Engineers. They're the first in the nation. So if you're wondering why a coastal resiliency webinar in Massachusetts that focuses on Boston Harbor has reached out to Fargo, North Dakota, you'll understand very shortly the importance of this project.
Well, thanks, Bill, for that introduction. Much appreciated. And you're right, ravine flooding is a bit different than coastal flooding, but flooding is flooding. And the parallels between the implementation of our project and what you guys are attempting to undertake are pretty significant. And I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from the FM diversion project. And so I'll just get into the presentation right now.
And while you're loading that, Joel, this is Martin. Bill, Joel's going to give this presentation, and I'm going to yield my time to John Shockley, who's general counsel and really the architect behind the financial plan and getting the project funded. So these two gentlemen will do a much better job than I would do.
Well, thanks, Martin. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
that.
Martin.
Just want to mention to the whole panel here, everything that the previous speakers have talked about has been applicable to our project, and I couldn't agree more with everybody's knowledge share and perspectives. In order to implement a mega project and something of the size and magnitude of what the Boston Harbor project is, you need to implement strategy, and you need to have the science, the politics, the public engagement, and of course the funding. So Bill, I just want to make sure, can you see the presentation just fine?
Yes, it looks good.
Perfect. So my name is Joel Paulson, the Executive Director for the Metro Flood Diversion Authority. I have with me today Martin Nicholson, who's the Deputy Executive Director, and our General Counsel, John Shockley. The Red River Basin is really contained within the states of North Dakota and Minnesota, and flows northward into Manitoba. Incidentally, Minnesota is the headwaters of the Mississippi, but this basin flows the opposite direction, which presents a number of flood challenges, both from ice jamming, spring thawing. We do have subsidence issues as well. And all of those kind of come together in one of the flattest areas of the world, which is the Red River Valley, that is contained within, or where Fargo-Moorhead is contained. So we've been dealing with flooding since the inception of the community, all the way back to 1897, which was a record flood. It's not new to us, but what we have been seeing in the recent hydrologic history is that flooding is becoming much higher rates and much more frequent. What really started the whole diversion project was the flood of 2009, which was a record flood. Previous to this, we had lost the city of Grand Forks, which is a sister city of Fargo-Moorhead, to the north in '97. At that time, it was the largest peacetime evacuation of any municipal entity in the United States, completely destroyed the community. In 2009, the Fargo-Moorhead community were within inches of losing our entire community, but we still had significant losses of structures due to flooding. The problem in the Red River Valley is that 1 foot of flooding really reaches out for miles because of how flat the topography is. And so after 2009, we began to have a real discussion about permanent, reliable flood protection on the Red River. Up until 2009, our response to flooding was really to pull in volunteers and use sandbags. Obviously, not a robust, sustainable flood infrastructure, but it had worked up until that point. But as we continue to see climate change and increasing frequencies and higher peak flood events, we knew that this was not a sustainable response to flood fighting in the Fargo-Moorhead community. So we had that call to action, much like the Boston Harbor had the call of action in 2018, as Mr. Golden had mentioned earlier. You really need that to get that public engagement, that political support, and to kick off your initial planning phase. And so what we galvanized the local community after the 2009 event. The local community really is about 40 different political subdivisions, townships, cities, counties, and of course, this is a multi-state effort between the states of Minnesota and North Dakota. We focused on 100-year flood protection as a minimum, with the ability to fight a 500-year flood event. And so with that galvanization came obviously the local funding aspect. We secured local sales tax initiatives that we intend to continue to use for the next 40 to 50 years. This is a multi-generational payback project. The current cost estimate for the project is $2.75 billion. We formed the Diversion Authority, which made up of local representatives in 2011. Bill was so kind to mention that we got from conception to building within 10 years. We learned a lot of lessons along the way. And I think if we would have done things in hindsight differently, we could have done that much quicker within 5 to 7 years versus the 10 years. And so what we hope to do, and as a part of the reason we're here today, is we want to be able to take the best management practices that we've learned through the blood, sweat, and tears, and be able to convey those to other programs that are just getting started or moving forward, just so you can lay the groundwork and so you can get to where you want to go much quicker than what even we did. We did retain a program management and the technical consultants right after conception as we began our strategy and our initial feasibility studies. And I do think that helped immensely in getting the right team together, bringing the right consultants, and forming that groundwork. We started to cooperatively work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 2012, and that really began our journey to where we are today. So this is just a quick organizational structure. You can see we have North Dakota representatives, we have Minnesota representatives, and from the counties and the communities, as well as representatives from an opposition group, which really in ravine flooding, the water has to go somewhere. If it's not in our community, it's going to impact somebody else. So we did work extensively with a group of folks that were negatively impacted from our project. And I can't stress how valuable a public outreach strategy and approach is, and really focusing on that outreach from the get-go. So as Bill had mentioned, this is the first project of its kind in the nation. There are no other public-private partnership water flood control projects that are as far along as our project. And uniquely, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has adopted our project as one of their principal priority projects because of that public-private partnership. And so we refer to this as a split delivery project. And so everything you see in the light blue, the diversion channel itself that routes the floodwaters around the Fargo-Moorhead community, outside of the main channel of the Red River, that's all being delivered by the Diversion Authority at the local level. The items you can see in the dark blue on the bottom of the map there, That's the control structures and the dry dam that prevents flooding within the community and directs the water into the channel. That dam and those control structures are being delivered by the federal government through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And so obviously this project is a holistic project. And so we're working hand in hand on a daily basis with the Corps of Engineers to deal with the environmental impacts. We monitor their construction, they're monitoring our construction, and it really is a unique partnership for the benefit of the local community. So the diversion channel itself will be delivered under one contract with a public-private partnership entity, a private developer. We're currently getting near within the next month to closing on with a selected proposer. So we're getting pretty excited to begin construction on the diversion channel itself. The southern embankment, or the dam portion, has been being constructed already by the Corps of Engineers. The Wild Rice River control structure and the diversion inlet control structure are already under construction. And we have a number of elements of the dam that will begin construction this summer by the Corps of Engineers. Here's just a photo of the inlet control structure. You can see these are massive gated structures that are being constructed by the Corps of Engineers at the moment. Here's the Wild Rice River control structure. And I'll bring John Shockley in now, our general counsel, to talk about the uniqueness of the public-private partnership and some of the benefits that affords flood control projects. John, if you want to take over.
Thank you, Joel. And thank you, everybody, for inviting us to share some of our experiences with our project. So the reason why the Diversion Authority selected the use of a P3 to implement the channel was the speed of delivery. Much like you're facing in Boston concerns about long-term flooding from coastal storm surge and the timing of delivering that, P3 is uniquely suited for mega projects to deliver a more timely construction product to the owners. In our example, under a traditional design bid build process, we had envisioned about 16 to 20 years of construction for the entire project. With the P3 portion of the project, it'll be delivered in about 6 years. And that has benefits both in flood year protection, preventing the community from that chance of flooding. And then also, when you speed up a large project, there's cost savings because you reduce the risk of construction inflation. And just briefly, I know that there's a lot of interest in kind of how did we set up the financing. So there's really a couple layers of financing involved in this project, and the P3 contract is a significant portion of that financing. So with a P3 contract, instead of a traditional design bid build process, the owner puts out a set of technical requirements, and the teams that compete and ultimately are awarded the contract are responsible for designing the project, engineering the project, operating it, and maintaining it. So you'll see in the structure, the P3 developer has a contract directly with the Diversion Authority. And then the P3 contractor has equity contributions from its shareholders, and then it also provides direct lending so that it can fund the construction of the project. And the construction of the project is split in 2 portions for repayment. The first is in what we refer to as milestone payments. And milestone payments are somewhat like progress payments, but not entirely. The goal with any P3 contract is to pay about 40%, 40 to 50% of the total CapEx of the project in milestone payments, which Joel has kindly advanced the slide. You'll see the milestone payments over the term of the construction. When it starts in 2021, our milestone payments through 22 through 26 equal about 60%, 55 to 60% of the total CapEx.
5 minutes left, guys.
Okay, and then after the remainder of that, that's repaid with AP payments over the next 30 years pursuant to a concession agreement. Joel, did you want to advance to the next slide? And so this is a general overview of our financing. So as Joel had indicated, the total project is about 2.75 billion. So from the federal government pursuant to the PPA that Joel spoke about, the federal government is providing 750 million, which equals about 900 million in today's funds through construction. And they're really responsible for paying for the construction of those southern embankment items. And then the remainder portions of the project are paid for by North Dakota and the local entity. So North Dakota, the state of North Dakota is contributing 870 million. And then locally, we are contributing a little bit more than $1 billion. And that's made up in the payments to their P3 contractor and also through different loans and financing mechanisms. Joel, did you want to advance to the next slide? I think one of the key components that might be worth looking at for the Boston community is a WIFIA loan. So WIFIA is a program that is being offered through both US EPA and Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers program is just starting to ramp up. But what WIFIA allows you to do is to borrow at treasury rates over longer terms than your traditional bond market. In our case, we had a nominal savings in debt of about 930 million over the project life. And even in today's dollars, that was right around $200 million. It provides cost certainty over the construction period. And I think probably the most important item to see is on the next slide, if you could advance that, Joel. As you'll see with WIFIA loans, the issuer or the political subdivision is able to sculpt their debt service. So WIFIA payments on the debt are not due during construction. So you'd have the advantage of not having to pay construction interest. And then at the end of construction, you have up to 5 years before you start your debt repayment. And then after that, you have an additional 35 years. So in our case, it results in a loan of almost 46 years. So we were able to sculpt that along with our availability payments to match what our local funding through the sales tax would be. And so WIFIA is a very powerful financing tool. I think the key takeaway is that when you're putting these projects together, you need to have a holistic approach. There's been some discussion about a regional approach that is absolutely necessary as WIFIA scores through their metrics. Regional projects higher than local projects because they want to make sure that the federal credit subsidy is being applied to regional projects that really benefit the economy and justify the federal tax credit. And I believe Joel was going to briefly cover the federal funding and our successes there and maybe some quick lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely, John, and I'll make it quick because I know we're almost done here, but here's a listing of the federal dollars that have come into the program. So as you can see, as we continue to gain traction, the dollars continue to come in. They come in slow, and then once you get past certain milestones and hurdles, they begin to come in fairly quick. Now, keep in mind, our project is not contained in the president's budget, and however, it is a priority of the Corps. And so the Corps, with that unique partnership that we have with them, has been able to work through their work plan to deliver the necessary dollars. The only caveat here that causes us concern is that John had mentioned the WIFIA loan providing that long-term cost certainty as well as our local option sales tax. We don't have that cost certainty with the Corps or with the federal government. And it really is an annual appropriation that we have to go back and continue to lobby and work on. However, at this point, we're so far in the construction that our project is very well known within Washington, D.C. So just a few lessons learned. Obviously, look forward to taking some additional questions during the panel. And if we had more time, we could talk hours about lessons learned. But I think starting early and getting that local support and that local funding aspect put into place is essential. Developing long-term project champions. So, we've had sustained progress through multiple local, state, and federal administrations, whether it's Democrat, Republican. Flood projects are nonpartisan. I mean, it affects everybody and affects entire communities. It's really infrastructure. And what we see with the Biden administration with this infrastructure emphasis that's taking place right now in DC, it's what was probably needed, decades ago. But regardless, we are where we are today, and it's a great opportunity for large mega projects to start moving forward. Develop your leadership early. Start looking for that local political support and putting into place your executive director, your general counsels, your engineering directors, and your program managers right from the start. We didn't do that, and we could have probably escalated the timeline of this project significantly had we had public staff within the diversion authority versus the politicians kind of calling the shots and acting as the executive directors. And then hire experienced consultants who are familiar with large projects. We have world-class folks working on our project from all around the world, including great local talent as well. And be flexible. It's a roller coaster ride. We get wins, we get losses, but ultimately at the end of the day, we don't take no for an answer. And we were able to innovate this project to the point that we are today. And many other projects that the Corps has at the moment are languishing. The Corps has a $100 billion backlog right now, and we would have been contained within that had we not innovated both on the financial side with the EPA WIFIA loan and our financial program, as well as the split delivery and the decision to move forward with procurement of a public-private partnership. So that's all I have, Bill. Certainly looking forward to enhanced discussion. I would just want to mention to this group, it's my belief that a national coalition of non-federal sponsors is necessary in advocating for the split delivery, the public-private partnership incorporation. As John had mentioned before, had we delivered this under traditional design bid build, this project would take 20 plus years, and it probably would have been 4 times the cost of what we are currently realizing with our project. So with that said, I think it's obvious why the Corps of Engineers and the federal government are so excited about this as a pilot project, and they want to take what they're learning here with our project and they want to spread it across coastal resiliency projects and other flood control projects throughout the nation in order to effectively reduce that backlog and implement these projects much quicker than they ever could under traditional Corps processes. So Bill, I would reiterate what you had mentioned. I do think the Corps is changing. Their philosophy is to revolutionize the Corps, but it's a big ship to turn, and it takes time, and it takes political capital, and it takes case study projects like this that are successful, that you can learn those best management practices and bring those to other areas of the country to get these projects done faster and at a fraction of the cost than what they would typically take. So thank you very much for having us here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, John, and thank you, Martin. This is an extraordinary story, an absolutely extraordinary story, and one that we can all benefit from. Your creativity and determination and problem solving is becoming legend, because you have created the poster child, if you will, for how you tackle an Army Corps project and make it work. And it is absolutely, you guys have been brilliant. And I don't use that term lightly. I mean, it's just astounding what you have done. I think there's some modesty that actually overshadows the extent of your accomplishment, Joel and John and Martin. I mean, John, what you were talking about is in terms of how the financing was put together, just remarkable, just remarkable. And I salute you, all three of you, in doing that. And hopefully in our discussion, we can talk more about how you actually accomplished each one of those pieces that was necessary to aggregate such a successful project. Just remarkable. So thank you all. The next speaker, William Hinckley, is the program director for the Massachusetts program that provides the most available funding along with CZM. Together they provide all of the funding. Actually, CZM's funding may be a little larger than the program that Bill Hinckley administers, but together it's about 50-50. And they're where the rubber hits the road. In Massachusetts, you heard a lot in the March 16th presentation by the 5 cities and towns that presented at that time, that in looking for immediate funding, they look to Bill Hinckley, who is the program administrator for the dam and seawall repair or removal program in municipal vulnerability. And it is Bill to whom they look, and it's his program that they rely on chiefly in funding, along with CZM's grant program, the local seawall protection that is so vitally needed by our communities. In bringing Bill up, I see Bill as one of the real leaders of a new generation that is focused on coastal resiliency and has devoted his career to public policy. So Bill, I believe you again, in terms of money today and money next month, you are the guy that we're interested in hearing from. So thank you very much for joining us.
Great. So I'm Bill Hinckley. I'm with the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And I'm going to speak to 3 different programs that we offer through EEA. And I'm going to focus a little bit on the dam and seawall program. And hopefully I can provide a little bit of context for the program, discuss what is available, discuss its limitations, and a little bit about how it may apply to the various projects that may be of interest in Boston Harbor. Not surprising to anyone that we have aging infrastructure here in Massachusetts. I'm going to talk about dams a little bit because it really is an important part of our program. There are about 3,000 dams in Massachusetts, of which about 1,400 are regulated by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And we haven't built a new dam in Massachusetts in many years, but we did start right very early in the 1600s. The earliest one that we've worked on here with a grant from our program was built in 1696, which gives you a bit of an indication of how old some of these dams are. And of all those dams, we still have about over 100 that we don't know who owns them. So this is a really big consideration for us. Meanwhile, on the coast, as you probably know, many of our structures are quite elderly. Many have long outlived their design lives, even if they had a design life in the beginning. Most of these weren't really carefully designed. They were put up in a fairly rapid manner in the 30s and the 50s. As in some cases, these were really built to provide work as much as they were to provide any sort of actual protection. And so as you probably know, a lot of the dams are highly regulated in Massachusetts. Coastal infrastructure, the operations and maintenance are not regulated by the Commonwealth in the way that dams are. So I think most of you will remember 10 or 15 years ago, we had a number of severe storms that really led to the actions that brought us to this point today. You may remember some of these. This is 2005 Taunton, Massachusetts. This is the Whitman Dam, and we had a number of severe storms that led to a great deal of flooding here. As you can see down in the corner, there's Senator Kennedy, Senator Kerry, and Governor Romney from the time, all down there in Taunton. Taunton had to abandon its downtown while we all waited nationwide for the dam to burst. Happily, it didn't do that. They were able to manage that problem, and there was no loss of life or major property damage there. But it really was an important wake-up call for the Commonwealth about the state of our dams. One of those wake-up calls came from the state auditor. And the state auditor reviewed the in 2010, issue 2011, about the way that we consider dams in Massachusetts. But what's important here, and they found, not surprisingly, that our dams were in terrible condition. But one thing that they did recommend in this report was that we should establish a fund for the repair of dams. Well, the legislator did just that. And in 2013, we did have a law to further regulate the dams in Massachusetts, and the way that, in a couple of very important elements about the way that we inspect dams, the way that dams need an emergency action plan. It strengthened the regulatory role of DCR, it dealt with abandoned dams, and it established the Dam and Seawall program, which we're here to talk about today. So meanwhile, also in the early 2000s, we had the Coastal Hazards Commission, and they were very concerned about the way that Massachusetts was preparing for coastal storms that we knew were coming and we knew were going to be becoming more and more severe with the changing climate. One of the recommendations and one of the outputs from this was an inventory of all of the public coastal protection infrastructure in the Commonwealth. And those are all still available today, and they have been updated over time. But this document became a really important way that we look at, from the state, at the way we do our coastal infrastructure. And the link to the Coastal Hazards Commission is there at the bottom of the screen for your reference later on. From that inventory, here's really sort of what is a big takeaway. So they looked at all of the structures that are publicly owned in Massachusetts by the state or the municipalities. And what they did is they tried to calculate what it would take to get all of those structures back up simply to a state of good repair, not to look at these for how to react to or to prepare for future storms, or even to look at all the other infrastructure. This is just state and municipal infrastructure. And in 2006, just to bring it back up to where it should have been in the first place, was over $626 million worth of investment required. So looking at that today, I went on the web and did a little calculator, and the present value of that number is now over $817 million just to return what we have to where it needs to be. Again, this is going back in some cases to 1930s design levels, not 2021 design levels. Another thing that these reports did is they established this table of ways to assess this coastal infrastructure. And many folks will be familiar with these two tables. And in many ways, it sort of mimics what we have for dams. It looks at the structure and its condition and what it protects and its priority level. So that is actually one of the very important tools that we look at when we consider funding projects. Well, just after all that came out, we got a bunch of blizzards and major floods in 2010. So as many remember, and this is just one of many, many different cycles of storms that we've had. But the 2010 cycle sort of coincides with the development of the dam and seawall, the dams element of the dam and seawall program. So that became part of coastal protection, became part of the dam program. And in the 2012 dam safety bill that we referenced earlier, we note that half of the money in the dam and seawall bill and fund should be used on coastal infrastructure and levees, so inland flood control, and the other half should be used for dams. So that gives you a sense of sort of how this funding for this program is set up. So about half for dams, half for coastal and inland flood. So shortly after the dam safety bill was passed and that provision for the dam and safety fund was put in, EEA started up its program. And in 2013, we began to offer grants and loans to support dams, coastal infrastructure, and inland flood control. As you'll see here, we've issued over $15 million in loans and $63 million in grants. So for Massachusetts standards, this is a lot of money. And this program is funded annually by the Capital Investment Plan and by the Dam and Seawall Fund. Our capital investment for FY21 is going to be about $12 million. And that's sort of where we have been over the last couple of years. The FY22 capital investment plan has not yet been released, but we are, at least at this point, assuming that that funding level is going to be something fairly similar. So here's some important information about our coastal structure grants and loans. So we have not, and we really don't fund any new structures. Again, the purpose of this project and this program is to go back and start to address all those deficiencies that were addressed in that coastal inventory. So we have so much backlog of existing structures that are still not even performing to 1930s or 1950s standards that we need to go back and address those structures. Publicly owned structures are only. So this is really municipal structures, although there is a provision for nonprofit owned structures if they protect things in the public realm and they're publicly accessible. This would not include structures owned by homeowners or businesses or anything like that. We can repair or replace the existing structures with ones that are more resilient in design. So you'll see that we do a lot of structures where we are raising the freeboard height of that to account for more storms and more wave action. All EEA projects and programs encourage nature-based designs whenever feasible. And that is something that is available through this dam and seawall program. And potential applicants should review our coastal zone management policy and guidance. So what is the policy and guidance? Here's really where it starts, is our 2011 policy guide. This is the statement of coastal policy on behalf of the Commonwealth. And as you go through that, you'll see that in general, we really try to encourage the use of nature-based landforms. And we recognize that hard structures can be really damaging to the environment. We are the Environment Department after all. And so one of the things that we like to do is to go back and understand this policy about the way that we try to repair this infrastructure. And so we are very careful about not making things worse, not going farther into the coastal zone than we already exist, not expanding towards the ocean. And you'll see that in these policies that we are required to follow. We also have this document from CZM about our storm smart coast, and it talks about how to repair and reconstruct seawalls and revetments. And again, this is something that understands that seawalls are very effective at retaining landforms. However, they can be very disruptive to the coastal environment and the transport of littoral materials up and down the coast. And so sediment supply is something that we're very concerned about going up and down the coastline. They can accelerate erosion, and they can, the erosion can then undermine those structures. So we're very concerned about the way that sediment moves up and down the coast with these and the way that it retains the coastal landform. So these, again, these links are available on this for your reference. A little bit more about the funding from this program. We do two different types of procurements. The first one is for design and permit grants. We allow up to $500,000 for a coastal project. And that is to really intended to get those projects up to that sort of shovel-ready place that we've talked about many times. Construction grants are also available, and those are for projects that are ready to go or very nearly ready to go. Perhaps they just need to get their bid documents out and posted to the public. So again, those would be up to $3 million. And what we found is $3 million really doesn't go that far when it comes to some of these big projects. These are very large and can often very costly projects. For all of our grants, a minimum of 25% match is required. The program also does offer loans up to $2 million at 2% over 20 years. Here's a bunch of things about the program that come from 301 CMR 15, which govern this program. And it's really there for reference later on. Likewise, some of our the priorities about what is funded are there for your reference. But again, they go back to those two tables that were developed for the coastal inventory. And we're looking for those that have the highest protection level and those that are in the worst condition generally. And we are particularly interested in those that protect public safety. And those would be ones that, for instance, would protect an evacuation route, would protect ways for people to leave the coast, ways especially those that may protect streets that may have large sewer pipes running underneath. We're doing one of those in New Bedford currently, a 7-foot sewer main going down to the main treatment plant happens to run right behind a seawall on West Rodney French Boulevard. And we're looking for the elements of the projects that recognize that the climate is changing and that can improve resiliency for that space. And in many cases, we do need to repair seawalls. Seawalls can be a very important element of the coastal protection systems. So here's one in Plymouth. This is a project that was recently completed. You can see that these are some modular units that were set here. This is quite an old structure, and you can see that it literally was falling into the ocean. I'm choosing this, and the reason we selected this project is this fronts the sort of where the Plymouth Long Beach meets the mainland. Directly behind this structure on the other side of that roadway is Eel River. Eel River is an important environmental resource. It's an important route for migratory fish, and it also helps to let a lot of water come and meet Plymouth Harbor. Oftentimes in storms, Eel River, the sediment, rocks, and cobble would come up and over the seawall and dump it all of itself and deposit it in the Eel River. Plymouth Town would have to come and excavate all that stuff back out to alleviate any potential flooding, to protect the resource, and to protect the fishery.
5 minutes left, Bill.
Ooh, so again, here's some photos of construction. You can see what a very large project this is. And the size differential of some of the wall structures that we're doing compared to the old versions. Sometimes repair is not the best alternative. Here's one in Chilmark where we help to remove a revetment and to replace that with a beach grass, and the town of Chilmark then change the way that they park vehicles for this public space. Sometimes dams are removed as well. This is one in Plymouth. Again, just to demonstrate that there are different ways to fix or remove infrastructure that may no longer be needed. Just briefly talking about the Seaport Economic Council. This sits within the Office of the Governor, and Lieutenant Governor Polito is the chair. The difference between this program and the Dam and Seawall program is this one really focuses on jobs, harbors, trade, fisheries, and the maritime economy. The Dam and Seawall program is primarily interested in safety projects, water and sewer infrastructure, protection of neighborhoods and businesses, and the establishment of green infrastructure. Talk briefly about the Coastal Resilience Program. This is from CZM. This program is open now. This is available to coastal communities. Again, for your reference, there are a number of different slides here that you can check when this comes out, or you can check their RFR. But generally speaking, they're looking for projects that are going to increase the resiliency of our coastal communities, including risk assessments, communication, planning, redesigns and retrofits, and shoreline restoration. And this will go into the the eligibility for that. and how those are evaluated. Finally, also briefly, and here on the call today is Carolyn Mecklenburg from EEA's MVP program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. We have two different projects or grant availability here. The first one is a planning process and program. And you'll see any of these communities that are in white have not yet completed a municipal vulnerability planning program. And so those would be all open, and we would encourage them all to apply. And what that does is it helps a community to outline its vulnerabilities to a changing climate. Once those are outlined and understood and documented in a community-based program, they can apply for action grants to actually execute those programs. This talks a little bit about the principles of MVP and how it works and what how it is evaluated, and the different types of programs that the action grants will fund. So, so that is all. Hopefully I was able to blast through that in the amount of time. I'm sure there's a lot of questions about the program, and I'm happy to answer those either at the in the forum, or later on you can contact me by email or phone, and that contact is in the agenda.
Thank you very much, Bill. As I said, Bill is where the rubber hits the road, and he has clearly outlined why that is the case. The state, by the way, has been a leader in coastal zone resiliency, as has the city of Boston. The state, with their advanced CZM programs for promoting municipal vulnerability assessments, and for their program in providing planning grants and also action grants to aid in construction, and with the Seaport Economic Council grants. So this state and the city of Boston and other communities have definitely taken leadership positions in coastal resiliency. And we're lucky to have Bill and the other leaders here that have really crafted that whole program and focused on alternative forms of infrastructure, like green infrastructure with wetlands and more perhaps ecological solutions. So that brings us now to our last speaker, but not our least speaker. Marvin Marcus is a municipal finance banker who is managing director of Goldman Sachs. Marvin has worked in New York City in the Department of Housing Preservation and Development as Deputy Commissioner in charge of policy and intergovernmental functions before joining Goldman Sachs. And we know as Managing Director in Goldman Sachs that Marvin is extraordinarily intelligent, very hardworking, and a serious player in national finance. But what might not be readily apparent about Marvin, if you looked at him only in that context, is that Marvin is also a person that's extraordinarily resilient, tough, and a glutton for punishment. Marvin was one of the longest serving chairs of the board of New York City's rent guidelines. And if you really want to take some punishing blows, be a bullseye for all the landlords and tenants in the city of New York. And that bullseye was squarely on Marvin for many years. So he brings to the presentation today an understanding of not only the private sector financing that can be done through innovative institutions and programs that Goldman Sachs represents, but also a profound understanding of how you get buy-in on programs and how important it is to reach out in creative ways to the public as you and to government as you're formulating these programs. So on that note, we're very privileged to have with us Marvin Marcus. And Marvin, would love to have you join us now.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. And I guess I've never been introduced before as resilient. So I guess that's good. I come at this in a slightly different way. Obviously, being on Wall Street, how to finance these kind of investments. And the first thing I would say and sort of begin to talk about is the difference between projects and programs. So we look at it from a capital markets perspective. How can we create a vehicle that could finance many projects? I'm particularly struck by the innovation of the Fargo project, WIFIA, which we're quite familiar with, which is similar to, in the transportation sector, TIFIA, and is a great tool. But this was a hand-tooled transaction, a bespoke transaction. And our view is, if you really want to accomplish large-scale goals, you need less bespoke and more off the rack, if you will. So we've looked at what kind of off the rack solutions might there be to financing resiliency. So let me step back and give a quick history, and then talk about a tool that we've been advocating for quite some time with limited success. Although I may be resilient, I haven't been able to be successful yet in this quest. So let me step back actually and go back to we've had a history here of interesting storms, if you will. Katrina, we've talked a fair amount about Sandy, but I'm going to go all the way back to Andrew, Hurricane Andrew in Florida. And Hurricane Andrew hit Florida heavily, as we know, and it wasn't really storm surge, it was just storm, if you will, if I recall, and heavy damage. And what resulted in is that the insurance industry really could not pay the claims or in 1 year that were required. And a mechanism was developed in order to spread the pain, if you will, of that event over a period of times. And that mechanism was to surcharge, to provide for lack of a better term, a tax, sales tax, if you will, on insurance premium, property and casualty insurance premiums in the state of Florida. And that was actually accomplished through something known as the Florida Insurance Guarantee Association, or FIGA. Those of you that are familiar with insurance will know a couple of facts. One is that insurance, as opposed to sort of banking and a lot of other regulated financial endeavors, insurance is actually regulated on a state-by-state basis. And that's one of the issues, if you will, that I think is somewhat problematic in solving these problems, at least the way we look at it. And in each case, in order to make sure that a consumer who doesn't really understand the creditworthiness of the insurance company that they're purchasing their policy from, there is what's known in I think in all states, a guarantee association, which says that if an insurance company goes insolvent, insurance companies do not go bankrupt, they go insolvent. If an insurance company goes insolvent, the rest of the insurance companies writing insurance in that state will make up the difference, will pay that policy. And in the wake of Andrew, many insurance companies did go insolvent, and it was a big problem. So FIGA issued bonds, and the bonds were, in order to pay, the bonds were repaid by this insurance surcharge. Staying in Florida, and what you had then also was many insurance companies getting out of the business in the state, property and casualty, homeowner, property and casualty, and other lines of property and casualty. So Florida created what's known as the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund, which is a reinsurer of primary insurers. And it's that reinsurer charges below market premiums, if you will. And I think in addition to charging premiums, the major strategy there is somewhat religious, and I'll call it prayer, which is you hopefully build up a surplus so that the next time a storm comes, you have enough money to pay the damages associated with those reinsurance policies. But as I further back up, given the precedent of the Florida Insurance Guarantee Association, they have the ability to sell bonds and surcharge policies in the state of Florida. These two situations are both post-event situations. In other words, the event happened, and this is how you deal with the fact that you're trying to spread out the loss. Fast forward to Sandy, and post Sandy, a very simple concept popped into our heads at Goldman Sachs is, why don't we turn this literally on its head and talk about pre-event funding, pre-event surcharges on property and casualty policies, and use those funds that are created by bonding those surcharges that are pre-event to fund on a programmatic basis, again, making a distinction between project and program, on a programmatic basis, resiliency investments. We're not advocating any particular kind of investment in terms of particular kind of project that this money should go to, but that it should be a tool on the state level. Again, the reason we focused on states is, number one, that's our business, but number two, insurance is a state regulated entity. So how would that work? To give you a sense, and I think I'm not going to use up anywhere near all my time, because I do think it's a relatively simple concept, and we've had great traction with the wonks, if you will, and this is a wonk group here, so you'll probably like this, but limited traction with leaders, if you will, to the point of, I'd say, non-existent traction. So there have been several reports and several advocates of this approach, but no political leadership has been willing to take it up. So let's talk about the state of Massachusetts, just to give a sense of how it might work, if you will. The state of Massachusetts, in the last calendar year for which numbers are available, had approximately $15.5 billion of property and casualty insurance premiums in the state. That's for 2019. And generally, insurance premiums do show a tendency to increase over time. If one were to put a surcharge of, remember, it's $15.5 billion. If one were to put a surcharge of, let's call it 3% on the premium base in the state of the Commonwealth, excuse me, I probably can't say that to any of the state treasurers or this kind of thing, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you would be able to raise approximately $465 million a year. I heard the previous speaker talk about his program, and I think it's a great program, but it's underfunded against the need. Clearly, I think everybody would agree. This provides significant amounts of money on an ongoing basis. If you were to bond that with certain coverage requirement, which you would be able to raise somewhere in the vicinity of $6 billion. When we've done the numbers, we've looked at sort of that would be not per year, but over a 10-year period, because as you might expect, it's not, most of these projects are not shovel ready, but it will take time to plan. And because you are collecting money, there's also the ability to use the excess above the coverage as so-called pay-go capital. So the pay-go probably based on an assumption that you do $600 million worth of bonds, if you will, every year. The pay-go over a 10-year period, and just limited, looking at 10 years, is an additional $1.7 billion. There are other abilities to leverage this, including if some of this is done not as grants, but as loans, then you can revolve those loan repayments etc. So there's many techniques that can be used that we've been using. So that's about call it an $8 billion program based on today's revenues. I would make several other comments before I stop. Sales taxes, surcharges on insurance that are flat, if you will, are generally considered regressive and not a progressive tax. Our view, however, in the case of surcharging insurance premiums, the greater insurance premium is associated with people protecting their wealth. So if you have a boat, you're going to pay more than if you have a used car that is 10 years. So that we think the progressivity in this particular tax regime or surcharge regime comes from the fact that the greater the wealth, the more people spend on insurance, and therefore this will be although the flat nature of the charge can be considered regressive, the income that will be generated is clearly progressive, given the fact that the people are protecting their wealth. Just commenting briefly on Senator Landrieu and federalism, if you will, and money going to the interior and all the rest. You know, that's one of the issues from our system, if you will, of government. You know, where the states. So if you were to look at this, and if you could convince people to create a central surcharge on all property and casualty insurance in the nation, just to give you a sense of what that is annually. Property insurance premiums in the nation in 2019 were $670 billion. So a relatively minimal surcharge, again, 2-3%, will create significant revenues nationwide to deal with this particular problem. As I said at the beginning, we come at this as sort of a macro capital markets approach, and we think this would be effective to raise a great deal of money to make localized investments. And in many cases, as pointed out, I think early on by Bill, actually, many of the local communities cannot afford to do the resiliency work that's required for their own little community because of their tax base. With that, I'd be happy to take questions, and hopefully gotten us back on track in terms of timing.
Before we jump to the panel, I'd like to thank you, Marvin. You know, Marvin is a clear example of why we need to tap the energy and creativity and hard work of the private sector along with the public sector to generate solutions for this existential issue. This is a new issue that we're facing with coastal resiliency in this magnitude. And in order to do that, we really have to think beyond our experiential lessons learned. We have to go into a new frontier. And there's no one better than that than Goldman Sachs and Marvin thinking about how this can be done. And if you think about it just for a moment, we've been talking through Bill Hinckley of the resources that are available through the state. And we're talking, you know, $12 to $20 million a year when we need billions of dollars for coastal resiliency. And yet, as Marvin has pointed out, we could generate from this 2 or 3% surcharge on insurance policies in a very progressive way, up to maybe $8 billion over the time of the project. And that could be a match to the US Army Corps federal funding. And we could, in fact, have the kind of program that Senator Landrieu and Justin have been able to craft in Louisiana, where they already have their 50 billion. You know, Fargo has its billions. Louisiana has its billions. If we're going to get serious in Massachusetts about addressing this existential threat to Boston and the 14 other cities and towns that flood through Boston Harbor, we need to have funding on that magnitude. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Daniel Moon, the President and Executive Director of EBC New England. to lead the panel.
Great, thank you, Bill. And thank you to all our speakers. I appreciate the wisdom that you shared with us this morning. So I'm going to go all the way back to Mary. So you're our Washington person. I'm going to call you that today. And, you know, there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of talk about infrastructure. You want to give us some of your reflections on where Biden may go with infrastructure, his infrastructure program, and whether that's going to adequately sort of address the climate issues that we're facing now and in the future?
Well, let me just say before I jump into that, Daniel, I'm happy to. I really, Marvin, so appreciate the idea that you shared. I've really been searching all over for private sector solutions and financing mechanisms, and am fairly familiar, you know, and followed what happened in Andrew, of course, with Homestead, that town being wiped out. And of course, Bill Nelson was the senator then, and I think he ran the insurance program, as I recall, in Florida. And you had I don't know if you remember Tom Gallagher, who was, I think, the treasurer running the program in Florida. And I mean, really, it is, when you're looking for big money, you have to look at the private sector in some kind of insurance piece, or leveraging, you know, with public-private partnerships, because Bill is absolutely right. We cannot do this with nickels and dimes. And I want to clarify that Louisiana does not have 50 billion. We can see about 20 billion. And we don't know if our plan's 50 or 100. We can see 20, but we can only see it because of the Deepwater Horizon, which is horrible. I mean, 14 men were blown up on that rig, and many people, you know, many communities were damaged. And we got that money because of the penalty. We don't want to have to fund our future on chance accidents and disasters and people suffering and lives lost. And then the only stable source of revenue we have, Dan, is the GOMESA funding, which I was able to identify a source of revenue going to the federal government already, and making an argument, redirect that, a portion of it, back to us that are producing it, sort of like the host state, you know, not privilege, but host state position, much like the Western states do. So that's kind of the traditional federal, outside of just give them money, grants and line item appropriations, et cetera, you know, trying to establish for your state a source of revenue. Let me say one more thing about revenue. Besides Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, Dan, to get to your point, I failed to tell y'all, but it's also important that the Florida Everglades, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Great Lakes have managed to sort of, with political power, get some funding every year. It's not like a permanent trust fund, but it's 300 million. I'm talking about where the big money is. Okay, follow the question on the big money from Washington. Chesapeake, Great Lakes, Everglades, they get about 300, 400, 500 million a year. Now that's pretty significant. So Massachusetts could think about organizing something like that and getting into that program, or you could establish your something like we have for GOMESA. Or Marvin is actually correct. If we want a really big solution, what he's talking about, although nobody ever, no politician likes to talk about tax or fees, what he's talking about would really work and leverage the trillions of dollars we need. So what is Biden doing? In this stimulus, Biden has put a lot of great ideas. You all can Google it and read the plan. I have it right here, read it this morning, the American Jobs Plan, right here. You can get it from the internet. Talks all about what the president wants to do. There's not a lot of specifics in this plan about what his specific ideas are for what Bill is talking about. Biden isn't saying, okay, I'm the president now, I'm going to come up with a plan to give California billions of dollars for their coast, Massachusetts billions. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen more piecemeal. And that is why we have to form a coalition. So we're not fighting against each other, and we can join our forces, the business community, the insurance community, the coastal advocates, the environmental community, and say, look, of these ways that you're funding now, increase it to X, or create something new like Marvin's suggesting, and do Y. Now, the Corps of Engineers has a big part in this, and I've been very critical of the Corps, so I'm really happy to see the Fargo guys say the Corps has been great to them. We're doing better with our Corps. But I shouldn't be so critical, because the Corps is so overstretched with so little money that it's frustrating for those of us that really need their money and can't get it quickly enough. But we could reshape something through the Corps. So the answer finally, Dan, is this. I'm not 100% sure what Biden is doing on this subject, but he is from Delaware, and Chris Coons and Tom Carper and Sheldon Whitehouse, they have some direct access to this president, and it's the time right now to, through this stimulus, create some big, not nickels and dimes, big thing. And so that's why the RISE Act is out there. It's not huge, but it'll create, hopefully $1 billion, coastal trust fund. It's not, but we need trillions. I mean, I hate to sound like, but we need trillions. Billions isn't going to do it. Massachusetts could use billions by itself. So we need to talk trillions. And even the 1.9 total trillion of the stimulus package is not really enough. You could spend all of that on coastal restoration. That's how great the need is. America has to think much bigger than we are thinking. And it's going to take ideas like Marvin's and blow up things like Fargo to do in more states, and take what Louisiana's doing and do it in more states, and find the funding. And if not, you can't build an economy on shifting sand and broken down rocks and dams that flood. You can't build a new America on that. And so that's the point. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. And I do want to encourage the other panelists to feel free to chime in and ask other panelists questions if you want, and dig a little bit deeper into an issue. Joel, I guess Joel and Justin, you both talked about forming authorities. We have experience with authorities here in the Boston area. Do you think that's something we're really going to have to do to deal with this Greater Boston Harbor issue?
Yeah, and Justin, I'll maybe start first, and you can comment later. I do think it's something that you need to look at. The commitment from the local communities that are affected by the project and the cohesiveness of bringing everybody together can really only be done by forming an authority or a joint powers mechanism of some fashion that allows everybody representation, so they have the say in helping to guide the project and moving it forward. But I think the common theme that we've been talking about here today is the regionalization of the support to attack some of these problems. And really that's going to be necessary, I believe, for the Boston Harbor project for it to be successful. And, there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. And Mr. Shockley on our team can attest to that. He was the author of our JPA and worked for many years to bring all the local communities together and work through the specifics of that agreement between them. And I think he did an exceptional job, but certainly a lot of effort went into that. And, we're dealing with, we have 5 member entities. You guys have mentioned for the Boston Harbor project, 15 entities. So certainly some groundwork to be laid there, I think, and a lot of coordination between all of those different entities in order to bring everybody forward.
So Bill, maybe you can talk to this a little bit, actually. The Mass Water Resources Authority has, I think there's 46 communities. So how in the world did that come about? You're on mute, Bill.
I'm proud that the MWRA Advisory Board, which is a co-sponsor with EBC, has supported this webinar. And they are actually, the membership of the MWRA Advisory Board is the 60 top leaders of their 60 member communities. They have grown over the years tremendously. But when I filed the lawsuit to clean up Boston Harbor, my suit was not really focused on the cleanup effort itself. How we built the facilities and how, what level they treated the water and all that. That was Peter Shelley's job in the Conservation Law Foundation that really spirited that, although the Quincy was part of that federal litigation. But we started a state litigation. The purpose of that was to create an institution, a state body that was capable of not only directing and implementing this major development on time and on budget, which in fact they did, but also having independent bonding authority so they could access the capital markets that Marvin has talked about and that Joel and John have talked about. That was incredibly important. And we formed the MWRA. In fact, the day it was formed, Judge Garrity, who had been the judge in our case, stepped down. I stepped down. And we agreed to transfer the Quincy case or join the Quincy case with the CLF case in federal court. But the key there was having the institutional capacity, the governing capacity on a single mission basis to address the needs that we have and which have been so well addressed by Senator Landrieu and by Justin Ehrenworth's programs to govern states and to get states to grab onto these programs and balance the executive and legislative authorities to avoid political pressure and to focus on science. So we need to do that in Massachusetts.
Dan, hi, it's Marvin Marcus. I would say if you look at the history of public finance in the United States, authorities are often the answer. So I think the answer to your question directly is yes, you need to have one. I mean, the one that maybe is the original one, I'm not sure it is the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. But authorities, I think, are the answer for this kind of, it's a different level of government necessary to create a regional approach.
Can I just mention the New York, New Jersey Port Authority? It's really interesting. When we started 3 years ago to go forward with something which is now Alternative 2 and the US ACE HATS program down there, the first entity that financially supported the first conference on a layered defense was the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. They listened. I had a 15-minute appointment with the head of it, and it turned out to be an hour and a half, and they ponied up money and they supported it with their prestige, and that made the difference in New York City. We need that same kind of authority leadership here in Massachusetts. And again, I thank the Mass Water Resources Advisory Board for supporting this webinar in that kind of fashion.
So, I mean, it's interesting, and even in the state of Massachusetts today, we have all these little pockets of funding, and at one point in time, do we bring it all together? I mean, years ago, I was sitting at a meeting with Matt Beaton, who is the current Secretary of Environmental Affairs, and they were talking about the MVP program, pre that actually, and I said, you can't just talk about studying it. You need to start talking about where the funding is going to come from. But I don't think we've made a lot of progress. We're doing little things. I mean, we've got the seawall funding, and we've got the Seaport Economic Council, which I've never heard of before, and I'm glad I learned something today, if nothing else. The resiliency. I mean, there are all these little pockets, and they're not coordinated. And I'm wondering at a federal level where with the infrastructure funding that maybe we just fold the Corps of Engineers into the whole big funding program so that they sort of know what's going on, and we get out of the short-term thing of having to fight every year for funding for each individual project. Challenges.
I mean, the problem is you need an MWRA as an independent source of repayment of its debt. So that's what's missing here. If you're depending on the general government fisc, if you will, you're going to have small programs. So you need a source of funding. Fargo did the sales tax. It created a source of funding, and that's why it worked. And MWRA charges, water and sewer charges. So that's the key, I think.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, I think this has been such one of the most enlightening seminars. I want to just say, Bill, thank you. And I've been on many on the subject, but I've learned so much and I appreciate it. I mean, to summarize, it's clear that two things that are essential, or three, is number one, a funding source, a steady, reliable funding source, as coordinated and as robust as possible. It can't be here today, gone tomorrow. It can't be, well, we might get it in 3 years. People can't function that way. They have to know, well, if we get this, then we can put this with it, that. And then what Marvin said, this independent authority, however you wanted to create it, either in each state or each region that has bonding authority, can tap the capital markets, and then a better coordination, with the federal government. But the reason that this money is so sort of in so many different stovepipes and pockets is you think about how the federal government is structured in a big picture broadly. Some of this money that we're talking about comes through the agriculture conservation program. Some of it comes through commerce and NOAA. Some of it comes through the Corps of Engineers. Some of it comes through the Department of Interior, like our money. And so the nature, and some of it comes through the Department of Transportation, a little carve out, for it. And so it comes to us, to all of our states, very fragmented. And then when it hits our states and counties, it gets even more fragmented. And then we wonder why we can't come up with these grand master plans that the time and the climate require of us now. So it's a rethinking in a big way. And I hope we don't miss this opportunity for Biden. So, John Kerry has a big microphone. He's from Massachusetts. He's got a big job. You can't kind of get the planet ready for climate without doing some of this work. And so I just think a group of us just need to keep pushing like we're doing. And because the will is there. This president really wants to do it. And Susan Rice at the Domestic Policy Council and Gina McCarthy, at least it's an administration really leaning into this issue. They're not fighting it. We just have to kind of really not under ask, ask for something that's meaningful. And so let's keep working.
We lost Justin. I'm not sure. I guess he had to step off. One of the interesting challenges we have is, how do we ever get into the situation where people don't believe in science? What in the world, where do we go wrong? That's what I keep wondering. And how are we going to change that? Or are we going to change it? The diversity of our world is just intense as ever. So Bill, what's the plan? How are we going to move this whole thing forward?
Dan, it comes down to political leadership and listening to Senator Landrieu. And she is the answer. She represents the answer. All the other speakers, Justin, Joel and John and Martin and Bill Hickley and Marvin Marcus, that is the leadership we need in the political, public sector and in the private sector. Without that leadership, we are not going to be successful in doing what we have to do. What we have to do is we have to have the institutional capability of doing this on a large scale. That has to be probably an independent authority, just as Marvin has just addressed, like the MWRA. We need the Water Institute in Massachusetts to develop a regional master plan, the kind of plan that Mary implemented many years, or initiated many years ago on a state level, then on a regional level with multiple states, and now is focused on a national level with. We need to look at the private sector. Both, I'll tell you that I'm just amazed at what Joel and John and Martin have done in balancing public sector funding and private sector funding. That is what we need. We need to unleash the power of the private marketplace, as Marvin does every day. And we need to combine that with that political leadership to address what is really one of the greatest existential issues of all time. I think it was Justin that said that they're losing a football field size parcel of land every hour and 20 minutes in Louisiana. And if a foreign country, as he mentioned, was taking that from us, we would be ready to nuke them. There'd be no stop on the money that we were investing into that. But we have not done that in the United States, and we have not yet done that in Massachusetts. My hope is that we come out of the meeting today with a continuing discussion with the expertise and experience and knowledge of the speakers and the attendees. And we really focus this dialogue on bringing, just because no state has the insurance program that Marvin addressed, doesn't mean we can't have a Commonwealth that has adopts that program. And there's no reason why we can't have the kind of master plan that Justin and Mary have advocated throughout their lives. And there's no reason that we can't pull together the kind of leadership at a local level and talent at a local level that Fargo, North Dakota has brought together. Boston, we have to wake up here. We have to look to the nation and the world to gain all the input we can get into solving this problem. And I hope that's what has happened today, that most of the speakers today have not been from Massachusetts. I think I'm probably pilloried in several areas of the state for not relying on just sheer local talent, although of course Bill Hinckley has shown we have that. We have to learn from the world, and we have the opportunity to do something that will save the city of Boston and the beautiful cultural and social and economic tapestry that is unique in the world, our hub of the world city. If we act now, we can do it for the next 100 years or more. But we've got to have the political leadership. We've got to have the private sector. We've got to have a single master plan that is based on science, not on individual political whim or authority. And we've got to do it now. We've got to do it now if we're going to access this infrastructure plan, guide it to what Mary says. We need to make sure it has coastal resiliency money in it. And then we've got to access it and make sure it comes to our community as well as to others.
Thank you, Bill. I can't disagree with you, of course. And I think we do have leaders here. I think the governor's done a great job of moving climate legislation forward, going back and forth with the legislature. Rhode Island's taking an aggressive stand now on climate legislation. And we certainly have leaders. We've got Kerry, as you mentioned, and Gina McCarthy down in Washington now. Senator Whitehouse, I say frequently that he's very supportive of the Environmental Business Council, and I say we have better access to a senator in Rhode Island than we do to representatives in Massachusetts, because he's so supportive of what we're doing and dealing with the issues on climate in the nation and certainly within the region. And actually, we have Governor Raimondo down in Washington too, just another person to support some of our agenda items. Any other parting comments from any of our speakers here?
Bill, Dan, and Mary, I think this is a great discussion about the state's role. And, one key critical component of the diversion project is the state of North Dakota funding. And we just, there's a bill on the governor's desk, hopefully it will be signed this week, for $435 million that was bonded money from the state of North Dakota for the FM diversion project. That passed the House and the Senate unanimously. There wasn't a single dissenting vote in the Senate. And the reason for that is because it pulled our project out of the state's traditional funding mechanisms and programs, and it freed up those dollars for projects across the state of North Dakota. And when you're dealing with projects of this size and magnitude, the traditional programs just don't work because the money can't be funneled through efficiently and with that certainty that Mary had talked about to support a project of this magnitude. And the entire state of North Dakota legislative body recognized that. And that's how they got behind providing that $435 million to us. That is fungible dollars that we're going to get in our bank account in August that we can use for capital cost expenditures and those milestone payments to the private developer that John had mentioned before. Absolutely critical. So the state has a critical role to play in the Boston Harbor project, just like the federal government and then the local government. And it's all about bringing that all together in a financial plan that works for the project that you're looking at.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in real quick and say, Joel, thank you. That's so important. And you all know, as all politicians, all of us are part politician. When you try to fund these big programs and ram it through, we call it the capital outlay program for the state. Joel, I don't know what you call your program, but that's what it is. It's a capital budget, whatever your capital budget is. You get resistance because that budget is already stacked full of bunches of things that legislators want. So the secret of this is getting it out separate from an independent source of funding, an independent source of funding, an independent source of planning, an independent science-based. Because that way, then you can get everybody supporting it, because you're in essence not competing with their highway money or their overlay money or their, park community money. It's separate and independent. That's a key. And we did that too. And we have some local money, Joel, that goes into ours, some sales tax that the local communities, Lafourche and Terrebonne, put tax on themselves to contribute to the master plan. So, that's also key. And I don't know, Bill, I'm game to take, if we could get the Secretary of Commerce, if we could get John Kerry and Gina McCarthy in the room with President Biden and lay this out to him and say, look, let's not pass up this opportunity with stimulus. If you give us the chance, we'll create these authorities all over the country. I mean, we can't do it all at once, but maybe we can start with some pilots, like Boston could be a pilot, or San Francisco could be a pilot, or whatever. And start like that and just get it going, because there's money out there in the private sector, but the federal government is just not structured, or not too many of our states are yet quite structured. But I'm encouraged. So let's not be discouraged, and let's just keep working together. So anyway, I'm happy to come to Boston anytime, and I'm so happy to see Fargo doing so well. I remember that flood, terrible for you guys.
Well, and I would add also, Mary, Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota is completely behind this program and is supportive of infrastructure across the nation. Senator Hoeven has been just a stalwart for us in moving this project forward on the federal level. So you got some pretty powerful senators, other places in the country that are focused on this. And I really think a coalition of non-federal sponsors that engages our individual congressional delegations with an effort to all be moving forward in the same direction, to one, revolutionize the core, change the way federal funding comes through, and we're all focused on flood resiliency wherever it is in the country. And we had certain local representatives that said, well, we got to keep our program a secret because we don't want to keep, for federal dollars with other people, and we don't want to let them know what we're doing here. Well, we're past all that. I mean, we're building this thing. We have all of our funding secured. We no longer have to keep it a secret. We can share our story with others across the country for the greater benefit of the entire country. Right?
Yeah,
In that spirit, Senator Landrieu, could we maybe work on the possibility of having a congressional hearing with all the speakers that have been on this panel today to talk about the importance of this issue and what can be done to actually bring the federal government's full power to bear? I think Gina McCarthy is a key player in all of this. Because this would be right up her mission statement, right there, up her alley in her mission statement. And John Kerry, of course. And then we have Richie O'Neill, the head of Ways and Means in the House. We have Stephen Lynch and Ayanna Presley, whose districts include the harbor. We could get a very powerful group from Massachusetts and add that to the New York delegation and to Minnesota and to Louisiana and other states. I think it could be very powerful and very timely if we could do that quickly.
Well,
Sorry,
I have a great idea, and I don't know if this will work, but there's several committees that a hearing like that could be done through. Obviously, one of them would be commerce, would have jurisdiction. You have Maria I'm talking about Senate, so please forgive me because I don't know my House as well as my Senate, but Maria Cantwell is over that. Now, the other interesting leader is Dianne Feinstein, who is the chair of APROPS on energy and water. That's where the core budget lies, with Dianne Feinstein. And John and our North Dakota, I'd really love your input into that. And Kennedy is her ranking. So Kennedy is the guy from Louisiana, not the most bipartisan guy, let me say, but and Cassidy is much more bipartisan than Kennedy, but Kennedy knows this issue well, and he's been somewhat supportive. And you're right about Klobuchar. She's been terrific. And, you know, and look, Kent Conrad, I mean, I was there with Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan when the thing happened. And I just sent Kent a text to tell him how great y'all were doing. But anyway, yeah, let's think about that, because if we could get this panel exactly, I love that it's Massachusetts. I love that it's Fargo. I like, you know, of course, the South. And if we could get a West Coast group, Bill, somebody that's doing something out on the West Coast, and I don't know if it's San Francisco or if it's the Puget Sound, you know, area, or if it's San Diego, I'm not sure, but you know, y'all decide. And I could approach Senator Feinstein or her staff and say, look, if you would do this hearing, now we have to have a big hearing room because this isn't a little thing. I mean, it would have to be, and if Gina McCarthy would lead in and John Kerry would lead in, I mean, and say, we can't let the stimulus package pass without some significant step here, you know, to take in it or adjacent to it or complementary to it, to get us started on this, because the Corps is leaning forward for the first time in our life, and FEMA is leaning forward. I think the Department of Transportation, you got Buttigieg, Buttigieg, I mean, he's very thoughtful. He would lean forward. So I don't know. And Bill, if you take the lead, I'll follow you.
Well, it's more of a partnership, Mary. It's hard to take the lead, but let me just say the San Francisco Preservation Development Commission, I know those people well. They are a powerful leader out there. And with Dianne Feinstein.
And with Dianne Feinstein, that would be the way to go. Yeah.
That's the way to go. So we have to involve them.
And we've got Senator Markey, we've got Senator Whitehouse here, so they're all very active, and Gina, Raimondo down in Washington, and you're right, we have a lot of partners, I think, that we can pull into the supporting the idea of having a hearing. So I think it's a great idea. Bill, you have your marching orders.
Yeah,
I know we have our marching. Marvin, I'm sorry, Marvin.
Yeah, no, I would only want to make one comment on the Fargo situation, which I think is great. Is they were willing to tax themselves. That is a key here, right? They were willing to contribute.
Right.
Didn't just say we need to, and that, you know, that is, if you say we're in, are you in? That makes it a lot easier than you want to be in. I'm not putting anything in.
So money's cheap right now too.
I did want to comment that I think one of the other key ingredients to our project is that we are delivering it through a P3, and you know, as a first generation P3 water attorney, we really haven't seen the P3 sector tackle water projects in the U.S. And I think, you know, when we talk about bipartisanship and infrastructure, right now the party that's not in power wants transparency and wants assurance that federal dollars will be properly spent. I think the P3 model that we're utilizing provides that assurance for that transparency and really speaks to that bipartisan effort. One of our advantages on the P3 side is keep in mind that the partner that you're bringing on, the private partner, they can bring that innovation to the project, and also they have a vested interest in seeing the success of the project over a period of 30 years. Because they don't get their full capital payment until the project's in year 30. And so not only are you gaining transparency in the operations and maintenance component of the project, you're also gaining a partner that has a vested interest in making sure that infrastructure is completed in a timely fashion and it's operational, because they don't, you know, that's the great thing about P3 is until they finish substantially complete the project, they're on the hook for 40 to 50 to 60% of the project. And so their lenders are driving them to the finish line. Great. And so I think it on these large projects.
John,
sorry, go ahead.
No, John, when you and Joel can be spared by Fargo, I think we need you in Washington, D.C.
Well, maybe in Massachusetts too.
Oh, and in Massachusetts as well.
Okay, and respecting everybody's time, as we're a little bit over by a minute. And so first of all, I want to thank everybody. And I want to, well, there's a few comments I guess they want me to make, and I can't see this yet. There it is. And then I want to turn it over to Bill to make his final comments. So we're looking for webinar. Always looking for feedback. This has been actually the quietest group of attendees. If this were an in-person meeting, I would be on everybody's case in the worst possible way. So I'm going to forgive everybody, but you're awfully quiet today. Again, the video recording of today's program will be posted and you'll get notice where that is. And again, consider joining and getting involved with the EBC. We'd love to have you do that if you're involved, if you're one of our not a member company. And with that, Bill, it's all yours.
Just very quickly, in Boston, we need to amplify the political leadership that we have here at the federal, state, and local level. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Mayor Koch in Quincy, who has really spearheaded the initiative I represent and has stood out with his leadership. But we need leadership at all levels. We need a master plan in Massachusetts and throughout the country. And we need to look at our funding options and to unleash the private sector. So what I would like to focus on right now is the discussion we just had. I think that congressional hearings could absolutely explode this issue on the national level right at the time when money is available. I think we need our leadership in Massachusetts to join in on that. And I think we need leadership from several other states. So I would invite the speakers that have joined us to join me on a Zoom call where we make that happen. We really drive this forward now. Now is the time to do this.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your afternoon. Enjoy the beautiful day. And this is not the end of you hearing about this regional project. So you'll be hearing more from us as we work with Bill on future programs. Okay, so thank you very much.